because we were looking for them.
I want to see if anybody was listening.
We seem to have them on file.
Yeah, it was like, well, she did them and then.
Is there anybody out in the hallway?
Yeah, she did.
Oh, Jason's going to do it himself.
Then why do we?
I
Not cold, but chilly. Jacket.
Okay, we're ready to roll. We have 12:30. As I indicate, we would wait 1 hour for lunch break. Just want to share, we did have 4 written comments come in, and I wanted to be sure those folks that had done that had been acknowledged. So with this, I'm going to turn this over to Clinton Bailey. He's going to help us facilitate, hopefully, to a conclusion on where we want to be. Clinton?
Thank you, Mayor, Council, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the format of the afternoon portion of the meeting. The purpose of this portion of the meeting is to provide the first opportunity that we've had for the City Council and P&Z to discuss the draft ordinance in its current form, get a better understanding of each group's perspective on a number of major items that are still up for discussion. We hope as staff that this will provide enough direction for any changes that may be proposed beyond this point that would be added. After this meeting, staff will generate a final draft. The current schedule is for P&Z to discuss those changes under the final draft on the 16th of this month, and then the council on the 7th and 21st of March. So I'm the meeting facilitator. My purpose is to guide the discussion of each item on the agenda, and for those of you that wish to participate in the discussion, I'm going to try to ensure equal participation. My objective is to ensure that we have a respectful, meaningful, and productive discussion. The Mayor Charlie Keeney and P&Z Chairperson Janice Pinking have ultimate control of the meeting, so if I get out of control, they can certainly rein me back in. Although there appears to be general agreement between Council and P&Z members on many of the proposed changes, Council is still somewhat divided on a few major items. As are members of the P&Z, it is my understanding. So the process that I'd like to go through as we work through the agenda items, again, this is a very important issue to Fredericksburg, the Fredericksburg community, residents, STR owners and operators alike. Going to make sure that we provide an adequate amount of time to discuss every item on the agenda, and it's my understanding that we have a couple of P&Z members that might have to leave a little bit early, so we'll try to accommodate you early on if there's a particular item you'd like to concentrate on. So for the process, staff will begin by introducing each item on the agenda, providing a little bit of background and history, much like Jason did at the beginning of the meeting. How did we get here regarding the proposed amendments? Then we will have just an open roundtable discussion among just the P&Z and council members and city staff. Again, if you do not want to participate, if you feel like you cannot participate, participation is not mandatory, but we will try to balance the time for discussion. At the conclusion of the discussion, the group discussion, I think this is a very important piece of this. We'll go around the table and ask council or anyone else to provide final remarks. Then we will try to repeat to council and P&Z what staff feels they heard in terms of direction on the items that we're going to be discussing today. So it hasn't been real clear to everyone in the past at the end of the discussion exactly what the direction may have been. We're going to try to make sure at the end of the discussion of each item that we're pretty clear moving forward. At the conclusion of each item, then I'll ask the mayor to move us to the next item on the agenda, and we'll move through the rest of the day. I anticipate this being a fairly lengthy discussion. Again, we're going to provide plenty of opportunity for the discussion, open discussion, but at the same time try to move it along. If we need a break at some point, I'd like to ask for a break every hour or so. If that's the preference of the group, we will do that. At this point, I would ask if there are anyone on council or P&Z that would like to make a comment. City staff, city manager, city attorney, you can do so at this time before we get started.
If someone on this panel would like to make a remark just to keep people from crisscrossing conversation, if you'd be kind enough to direct Mayor, I'd like to speak, or Clinton, I'd like to speak, then we would give you the floor to have that opportunity to speak, so we don't have this crisscross of you said, and I want to say, you know, kind of get jumped in before you have an opportunity to hear what that individual has to say. So with that being said, as Clinton said, does anybody have any opening remarks from council or P&Z? There being none,
Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Daniel.
I just want to briefly discuss the ethics questions that have come up. So I prepared a memo, and I've distributed it to, I think everybody on Planning and Zoning and City Council has received a copy of that at this point. And this is obviously a multifaceted issue. We're not answering one question, we're looking at 20 or 30 questions. And so we have to look at the potential conflicts on each of those questions and how it will impact the different officials. And so what we're looking at is an official's business interest or their real property interest, and whether the action that we're discussing will have a special economic impact on them that is distinct from the public. And that's sort of the threshold question that determines whether you need to recuse yourself and disclose that conflict. For example, anyone that lives in R1 or owns property in R1, I mean, there's going to be some impact on you, but because those questions are so broadly applied across the entire zoning district, they're not going to be considered to have a special economic impact on you. So I identified as many, I carefully went through all the proposed action as it stands right now, and I identified the sections that I envision may present an issue for certain categories of individuals. And at this point, I've got 3 members of Planning and Zoning that will likely need to, that they file disclosure statements, and they will probably need to recuse themselves from at least parts of the discussion today. And moving forward, as this proposed action changes, this is kind of an evolving question, I guess, and so we'll have to continue to monitor it and identify that. I don't know everybody's personal, I don't know everybody's business interests, I don't know everybody's real property interests, and we also have to consider your close relatives' business interests and real property interests. I certainly don't know what those are. So the burden is on you to let me know if you think you have an issue, then I can advise and provide guidance, and we can work through how to handle that. Also, if the action doesn't reach that threshold that requires you to recuse, you can still, you don't have to stay in. If you feel like compelled that you want to recuse yourself, you can do so. But once we reach that threshold, once we reach the legal threshold where you're required to recuse, failing to do so can subject you to criminal penalties, and it could jeopardize the action that's taken. So I just want to let everybody know that. I haven't had any questions on that, but I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that. And so we'll work through these ethics issues as we discussed today and moving forward.
Okay. You indicated there's 3 P&Z members that need to do this. Will they know when it's an opportunity to be doing that?
Well, I've discussed that with them ahead of time, and that's also why I'm sitting. That's why I'm sitting over here to try to help them with it.
Thank you.
Because we're not having a real, as a conversation kind of transitions from issue to issue, suddenly they may need to step back. So we're going to
direction. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Go ahead. Yep.
Kick us off?
Let's go.
Okay, Jason, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Not as crowded as we were a little while ago, but hopefully we can get started. So I'm going to jump right into it. We're talking R1 zoning districts. So as we work through our draft, You will notice the first draft did not allow short-term rentals in there. We did allow the owner occupied, so B&B or STR accessory structure. The STR unoccupied has been removed since draft 1, but we made some minor changes and tweaks, especially as we got to draft 3. At that point, we included the CUP process. We actually had that in draft 2. I think roughly 90% of R1 categories were allowed to apply. So at draft 3, we pulled that back and found out that it was probably only applied to about 130 so properties between the R1 and R2. And then this is again for STR unoccupied. So as we went through the draft 4, we took out the CUP process. So a little bit back and forth. So as it stands right now, the only thing you can do in R1 is owner occupied, and that's all you can do by right. The question has come up, do we allow a CUP process for those properties that may be adjacent to commercial, those properties that may be considered on islands, or the last landowner on the block? Can you give relief for some of those people? So that's the decision that this body needs to kind of direct me and give me some guidance there on whether we want to keep them prohibited, and if we want to allow exceptions, what are those exceptions, where are those exceptions, and what is some guidance on those exceptions. So that's what I'm looking for, and I'll be taking notes as y'all discuss that to try and capture all of y'all's thoughts and hopefully get a draft to y'all on that. So I'll turn it over to Clinton and we'll go from there.
Okay, at this point, we'll open it up to discussion. And again, if you would like to participate, if you can participate, I'm not going to go around the table at this point. It's completely open discussion.
Mr. Mayor? Please, Jim.
So the CUP process has served us well, I think, for a very long time. There's some of us on P&Z who've been around for a long time, and we've seen a lot of complicated issues come up. So I don't really see a real reason for not including it. In the special categories, as you mentioned, probably would be the best restriction for that versus an overall all R1s. But then how do we define those special categories? You mentioned 4 examples. Is that all the examples?
We might need 2 mics, Clinton. There were several categories or examples that we did in draft 3. One of those was if more than 2 of your property lines were adjacent to an STR, so you're sandwiched or side and corner. There was also an option if 50% or more of the properties on your street between intersecting streets had STRs. Again, that area has transitioned, so or starting to transition. Do we allow that there? The third category we had was very similar to a zoning change, where groups of people could ask for a zoning change on a whole block, but it would only be for any property that wanted to go, as long as the applicant had 75% of the owners within 200 feet sign an affidavit that they were okay with that. So those were kind of the 3 criterias. If you would like to see a map, I'll leave it up as we discuss this, because this was developed for this type of issue. So give me 1 second. And I don't know if y'all can see this very well. I guess I'll need to turn off my phone. I want to see this. There we go. So this would be kind of some areas here. If you look at the map, this was the reason for the original CUP and this was from draft 3. So if you look at this block here, this is kind of our good starter kit. Most of these homes here, the green ones, are active short-term rentals. Again, staff is recommending that unoccupied STRs be prohibited in R1. So if that change goes through, this property owner here may have a difficult time getting out from that property. So this was to allow some relief for them, where again, this block has transitioned. It's adjacent or very close to Main Street, some commercial area. This would probably be an area where in these cases, if someone requested a CUP, staff would probably be more likely to recommend approval of those. Another option would be just for all of the landowners to apply for a zoning change, but that's a separate process. So that's the nexus or the thought behind the CUP. If you look up here, this one is based on more properties on each side. But this one here is based on more than 50%. So this property could apply that one as well, even though it's not on two sides. So those were the very limiting functions of the CUP. Again, it's more designed for relief. So as you pull out only the purple spots you see, those would be the few that would be allowed for the CUP process.
So if I recall, the change from version 3 to 4 was prompted by a couple of city council people saying no CUPs, period. I can't recall from a P&Z standpoint that we've ever approved a CUP that had a good portion of the citizens objecting to it, number one. It didn't make any sense, number two. It didn't meet the codes, number three. So I still would like to see us leave that in this version so that it has a reasonable approach to instead of no, not at all. Just my thoughts.
And by zoning change, just to clarify, you're talking about going from R1 to R2?
Yes, if landowners want to do that. That's a separate probably issue, not really related to this. But as part of that draft 3 CUP process, we did identify some areas where the unoccupied STR would be allowed by right in R1. We asked ourselves, originally we said the CUP would be in areas adjacent to commercial. So if you see all of the black, these are all properties that are adjacent to commercial zoning. As me and my staff kind of walked through and talked it out, if any of these property came in and said, hey, we want a CUP, what would staff recommendation be? And in most cases, based on their location and what was going on, we were going to recommend approval in most likely instances. So we decided these would be the only areas in R1 we would allow them by right. This is, again, this map is showing R1 and R2 unoccupied by right. I think total would be around 500 properties. So that would be allowed to do the unoccupied in R1 or R2. So again, this one, as you can see, starts to help establish more of a zone. Again, the comp plan tells us that tourism is an important part of our industry and our city, and we need to find the appropriate places for those businesses to go. So we feel like this map would start to achieve that if that was the way council and P&Z wanted to go.
And that also follows our long-term plan that it's a transition versus a commercial then a residential one. This establishes a better transition to that R1.
Yes, sir. It is a slight transition. The state says STRs are residential uses. They also say we can define those uses differently and how they operate and put them accordingly. And this would be a transition between pure residential to quasi-residential to commercial.
Jim, one of the things you're right, we did talk about R1 and not allowing any further STRs there. We asked about, actually Bobby asked about Jason's proposal to allow them next to a commercial area and what that would look like, and that would be, Jason responded, that would be along Llano Street where there are spots of businesses, and then an STR could be located next to that, but we felt that would set up a continued transition one after the other. So to protect R1 and as a residential area, and to give the residents, current residents there, some certainty about the future of it, we decided to disallow any further STRs in R1. A CUP does not give people certainty. They still have to worry that there might be an STR going up in their block. They still have to participate in a process they would prefer not to participate in. So that R1 we wanted to protect. And anybody else can add to that. Just to have an understanding of where we were.
Let me add to that. When you say "we," it's not maybe the entire council.
Well, it was the majority of the council.
But cups aren't just handed out. And-
I understand that, but they.
And I kind of take offense to that.
They do allow for uncertainty in what can happen. And we gave R1, the three of us who voted for it, some certainty into how their neighborhood was going to be into the future.
I don't believe there was ever a vote, Kathy.
Huh?
Was there a vote?
There was, all right, there was an opinion because we weren't allowed to vote expressed.
Please.
Jason, do you have any numbers of how many homes there are in R1 and how many current STR permits there are as we're talking about this?
So I do have some numbers that I can share with you. They are not updated numbers. I'm still working on the last data dump we got from our prior vendor was not reliable. So we're asking for another data dump and we'll start processing those. But I'm really, I have a good high confidence in the numbers that we have. So sorry, let me find this. So these were the numbers. I don't know if you can see these. I don't know if I can zoom in anymore on this slide, but roughly in R1, we have approximately 3,711 properties. If we looked at our total active, pending, and closed numbers, and when I say closed, that is maybe an STR that has not renewed their permit. Most of the ones that I looked at are still active, so I don't think that they're just closed or gone away. But potentially, we're looking at a total of 428 of the 3,711 properties. There's actually more units because we have found several R1 properties are operating multiple units. Some of those were grandfathered, some of those were not. So we're looking at about 11.5% of our existing R1 housing stock as some type of short-term rental at this point.
Thank you.
And these are, again, from several months ago, so we do anticipate that number has increased.
Jason, does that include accessory units?
Yes, this is every STR permit. Technically, the R1 does not have accessory units. I mean, they can if they live there, but we don't have a lot of true B&Bs left over at this point, but we do have some.
Jason, if you become, these folks don't have a microphone, or at least I didn't hear it, you might want to repeat the question. I don't know if that picked it up or not.
I just asked if that number of STRs in R1 included accessory units.
Okay, thank you.
And yes,
Oh, I heard it. I didn't know if the folks out there heard it.
Can y'all hear okay out there? Okay.
Tom, it looks like you want to jump in on this.
A process that concerns me with totally eliminating the conditional use is, what if you're the last man standing on the block and your property is, you're surrounded by short-term rentals, and the version 4 draft would, I guess this is the way I read it, is that the only option you have is to sell it to another homeowner who would be living, who would be willing to live in the STR neighborhood. So I believe that we need to have some kind of a mechanism that, like in version 3, we had 50%. Maybe the 50% is too low. Maybe that needs to be 55% or 60%. But I believe that we need to have some kind of the ability of a homeowner who wants to get out of the neighborhood because it's become an STR neighborhood, to be able to do that. And if the neighbors are unoccupied STRs, then I think we need to have a provision so that a homeowner can sell their their property, and that might be maybe the best use of that property. It might be some type of STR. It might be another unoccupied STR. And I know one of the issues that is, I guess, contentious among the council and among the Planning and Zoning Commission is the proliferation of short-term rentals, primarily in R1. I don't know that there's a lot of consternation about R2 because that is a higher density zoning district by design. So I think that my personal feeling is no matter what we do, my public policy, I think if everybody's mad at you, if both sides are mad at you, you've probably created good public policy. Not everybody's going to get what they want, but we have to try to craft an ordinance that is in the best interest of our community. And if that means that I'm the last, I live on a block and I'm surrounded by STRs and I feel I need to move, then I should be able to sell my piece of property, and it's probably going to be sold to somebody who wants to put an STR in. And there's really nothing wrong with that, and that's kind of where I'm standing right now as far as the CUP, as far as CUP process on the expansion of STRs next to commercial. I'm open to some more discussion on that.
Thanks, Tom. Oh, please do.
Mayor. I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
It's a simple question. Based on some of the comments made, Jason, do you have an estimate of how many CUPs have come before P&Z of late and what percentage we've approved? I should know that or should have an idea, but...
If I talk, let me just do a quick count in my head. I've been here 1 year, so we've had 12 meetings. I want to say 6 or 7, I believe. And I think all of those were approved. However, the beauty of the conditional use permit was you can put conditions on it to help mitigate some of the issues. So one of them was an STR facility, and we worked with the owner to put fencing, and they were able to relocate their hot tubs and turn their buildings to get a buffer. And so ultimately, what was a major concern through the CUP process turned into a benefit, and I think it was a win-win for kind of everybody. But no, we haven't had more than one every other meeting or so probably 6 or 7 since I've been here.
Excuse me, I've been one that is concerned with the loss of R1 neighborhoods. I did express my opinion that I was for only owner-occupied or an accessory building in R1. After the meeting, I started thinking about what about the person that is the last owner-occupied in an STR neighborhood, and they want to sell. Their only real option, in my mind, is sell to somebody that wants to do an STR, because I don't know of too many people that are getting in line to buy a house next to a neighborhood of STRs. I could be wrong, but anyway, so I talked to Jason about that, and if the CUP process would allow the ability of that person to sell to an STR, I think that's the best way that person could realize get the value out of their property. And as far as being next to commercial, I'm like Tom. At first I was against it, but I'm open to discussion on it, so.
Anybody? Okay, yeah, I knew Polly would jump into this one. Thank you, Polly.
Go ahead, I had you
You
muted.
got me? Okay. So based on that map, we're looking at plus minus 500 properties
Yes,
involved. And so it's like we're going to have this inventory of these exceptions that we'll work through over time as people come in and ask for dispensation in their situation. But given that we're building a fairly substantial amount of new R1 communities in the city, we're going to have an increase of R1 inventory over time as well. So I think what I'm saying is, I think we need to provide some relief for some of these stranded type properties and buffer type properties. And I could go, I'm really more focused on the stranded properties, the ones where the homeowner is now in a really economic bind because their uses now are so restricted. And the enjoyment of the property is dependent on what's around it, so they're kind of stuck. So I'm for a CUP process to handle those stranded properties in the older parts of the city where we don't have HOAs and we don't have deed restrictions and STRs are not already restricted. On the buffers, the only thing I'm concerned about is how many buffer zones we've got. I'd like for us to relook at that. That may be too many buffer zones. I'd just like us to be careful with where we say it's a buffer and where it's truly not. So if staff wouldn't mind looking at that again and see if there's opportunities to reduce that number. I do think using STRs as a way to buffer between commercial and true residential could be a good technique that we can use to create those transition zones and not have a true R1 right up against a commercial, because we've run into all kinds of problems on P&Z and on council formally with commercial abutting R1 in particular. That abutment is a real hassle in terms of separating uses and protecting the residential side from the commercial activity. So that would be my thing. I think if we can narrow that down and tailor it more in terms of the number of properties that are affected and be more specific about how that land can be used. It can stay in R1, but when it turns to an STR, use the CUP process to really create that buffer between commercial and the rest of the R1. I'd be more interested in that type of an approach to those properties. Other than that, I think that those would be the ones I'd be interested in seeing us put through CUP. Some of the other ones I'm like, you know, but the strandeds bother me, and this buffer problem between commercial and true residential, using as a tool to address that buffer might be a beneficial technique.
Could I ask you a question, Polly? Because what you're saying sounds good to me, but I don't understand what the buffer would be made of, how that would look.
So that STR property, if you will allow that to be an unoccupied STR, so you've got, say, a C1 or a C1.5 or even a C2 on one side. And so we've got a lot of ordinance around, if that's next to residential, we've got screening and lighting and all this stuff and distance for the commercial side from that. But you could further protect the rest of the R1s by allowing that one to be an unoccupied STR, and it takes the brunt of any effect from the adjacent commercial and kind of serves to protect the next R1 next to it. Now, what you'd have to do is, like in our CUP, like what we did for that one in the shopping district, where we required them to up their fencing. You know, they had to bring in higher fencing. They had to go up to 8 feet. They couldn't put their hot tubs close to the R1. They had to move them over towards the commercial. They, you know, all these things. Right. And using a CUP process would allow P&Z and then City Council to look at the site plan for that unoccupied STR and ensure that it's structured to where it will create a buffer between the adjacent commercial and the adjacent R1, and it sits in the middle.
But if the house next to the unoccupied STR came in to have an STR.
No, I'm saying
That would be
you
not
get the one
allowed.
lot. Yeah, it would be, I'm asking about those pre-identified black lots that are
Yeah, I
already
understand
there.
that part, but.
And therefore, we're working off of a fixed inventory of properties, and over time, that fixed inventory goes away, and they either are or they aren't. You know, those have the capacity to become it, but all the new developments are coming in with no STRs. I mean, we're not seeing hardly any new neighborhoods coming in saying they're gonna SDR the neighborhood. Most of them are coming in with, we're gonna HOA it, we're gonna deed restrict it, it's not gonna be STRs. So we're not gonna create new neighborhoods with SDR opportunities, so we're winding down an existing inventory of properties. And I'm just saying those black ones, we can create a limited number of properties that we then wind through the process, and then we're done.
Thank you.
Just one question for you, Polly, on this. We are creating new commercial areas, though. So would the buffer extend, the suggestion for a buffer, would it extend to areas that are zone commercial in the future? That's a question.
If the adjacent R1 is already in an HOA, then you'd have no opportunity.
But what if it's not?
So are you saying if we add more commercial adjacent to our existing R1?
We annex property in and we zone it commercial, would that area next to that automatically qualify as a buffer zone of any type?
My suggestion would be that's a decision of council at the point of annexation. That you look at the situation that you're annexing and then determine, do you want that as a buffer, or do you just want it to be pure C to R and that's all you want to do?
But what I'm trying to get at is we're not establishing a finite number, because we will be zoning other areas in the future commercial, and therefore with the buffer argument, or with that position, then we will potentially add more areas that could be qualified as a CUP.
So my question is, and this may be a Daniel question, can you restrict that to the existing properties now? To say this process only applies to what exists as of this date, and all new properties go under a new regime?
I think Jason has some input.
Yeah, so just I guess to clarify, the question is yes and no. It would be dependent on how council wants to handle this. If council wants to say, yes, these black areas that we identify that could be possible buffers, if council says, yes, we should allow that by right, then yes, any new annexation area that comes in will automatically qualify the adjacent R1 to be a by right. If council wants to go and take these black identified properties and make them a CUP for the buffer, then any new annexed area would only allow it to be as a CUP. So it just really depends on how council wants to go with these areas is adjacent to commercial. Is it by right or by CUP?
Good. I'm going to weigh in right quick. I've been a proponent of CUP since the beginning. I think it gives neighborhoods an opportunity to be alerted to the fact that there's a possibility of a short-term rental being processed. I agree with Tom. I agree with Jim. I like what Polly says about the buffers. I think that in Tom's comments on buffers, I think it's excuse me. I think what Jason proposed is certainly something that I, as a member of the council, would really consider. As you say, what's here today is here. What's coming tomorrow would be under a CUP process. So if I got the feel right, I believe there's a consensus on the council of a CUP process.
Well, not from me. So, I don't know about Jerry.
We did hear a little bit about special provisions for CUPs being considered, certain circumstances. Any more discussion on that?
Yeah,
Last man
one other thing on the, I guess, on the CUP, and I guess specifically, if we're looking at the, say, a map that, say, North Llano Street or North Milam Street. You've got all this commercial property that's going up that is, that's adjacent to R1 homes. And the idea there that the R1 behind it might act as either as a buffer to the commercial, or it might be suitable for a short-term rental type of use. I would propose that if we decide to allow the expansion of STR usage into those areas, that those properties be excluded in the future from any kind of calculation on converting a neighborhood like the 50% neighborhood, so that those properties are out of, or would be out of the mix as when there would be any kind of consideration. Because I'm very cognizant that of the idea that, okay, we've moved the STRs closer into a neighborhood, therefore it's allowing other people to then say, hey, I'm closer to an STR, so I should be able to change my property. My point here is that the properties that are adjacent to commercial are unique properties. They're not in the middle of an R1 zone. They're unique properties because they are adjacent to a commercial zone. So I think we might consider treating those properties as unique properties.
So that is very similar to what we're doing for the STR B&B and the owner occupied. If you have those in your yard, they do not count towards the CUP process in one of the drafts. So you kind of like that process?
I would just like to make a comment. Having lived on North Llano in a commercial zone, I lived in a C1 zoning. Really having a neighbor as a C1 is not so bad, because most of those businesses are only open during the day and they're quiet at night and on weekends. What you're doing is you're moving a short-term rental closer to the neighbors and actually getting the noise level there on weekend, or the activity at nights and on weekends. By having this buffer, you're moving more activity into the R1s instead of less on weekends and nights. So, you know, I know we're trying to find a place to do that, but having C1 neighbors is not bad, because most of them, their hours are very conducive to being neighbors, because they're not open at nights and on weekends.
But that opens up.
It opens up some more places.
It opens up to where an R1 could become a B&B.
Right. I'm saying it does give more places to have them, but you're going to also be moving more activity into the R1 areas. Instead of having a buffer, you're actually moving more activity into it.
I'm still not changing my mind on this stuff. I think it should be R1 owner occupied and R1. The comment was made that B&Bs have changed. They have changed tremendously over the years. And what has Ken Carr said it best. He said, the investors have found a honey hole in Fredericksburg, and this is what they're doing, and they're capitalizing on it. And it's not all about the money, but then the comment was made, why the hurry? Well, Tammy made the statement. They're doing that development, I think, on San Antonio Street, and she said, the next thing I know, I got B&B all on all the corners around me. So that's the hurry, because every time one goes in, there's another one right behind it. And I think there is a hurry. I think we need to get something set up that is going to protect the R1 neighborhoods. I see our neighborhood back over there on Cross Mountain and Avenue D in that area. It's just changing. Every time you turn around, there's another house being converted to a B&B. It's not right. B&Bs can be good in certain areas, but I've also heard and comments made that some of these B&Bs are advertised as close to Main Street. Well, hell, they're a mile out now. The women in heels, are they gonna walk a mile from down Mallard Street to go to Main Street? No, they're not gonna do that. So I don't have a problem with B&B. I just have a problem with B&Bs in R1.
I just talked to Jason. I could live with he had told me that that B&B, STR B&B and STR accessory building would be allowable next to commercial. And so that's fine with me. The other question I have is on the map that was down next to Cherry and that whole area where you have a lot of STRs right now, and the idea that they could apply for a zoning change from R1 to R2, wouldn't that be spot zoning?
Yeah.
And isn't that prohibited?
I think Daniel can give you the legal definition of spot zoning a little bit better than I can, but when we're talking entire blocks like that are adjacent to a certain area, and council makes the findings that area is appropriate or different than others and can do that, I do not believe that would be a definition of spot zoning from a planning standpoint, but I would need Daniel's just to weigh in and make sure I'm right.
So spot zoning doesn't have a fixed definition. It's sort of an analysis of a lot of factors. And one of the factors you look at is the disparity between what the zoning of the subject property is and what the surrounding property is. So like if you were going to put C2 in the middle of, as a donut hole in the middle of R1, that's a different situation than if you're going just one step up, maybe in residential density from R1 to R2. So, and particularly if you've got, already have maybe, part of the subject property has uses that fit into your new zoning category, so it's not a dramatic change in what's going on in the neighborhood. So just sort of given the scenario that's being proposed, I don't have any concern with that being considered spot zoning in that particular circumstance.
Okay, and then it would allow, let's say that if it was changed, then because it would be contiguous to other R1 areas, those other R1 areas, because they're contiguous, could then say if they meet the requirements, we would like to change from R1 to R2. Just like right now, say in R2, you've got, if enough property owners in an R2 area say we want to change to R1, they can do that.
I mean,
is that correct?
I mean, zoning's always fluid, and it's intended to change over time as the uses change. There's not a requirement that it be contiguous, but the less contiguity you have between a similar area, the more likely it would be spot zoning.
Okay, thank you.
I think we may be getting pretty close to a consensus on a couple of exceptions here. I think it might be time to ask Jason if he has an understanding of what the majority of the folks that have spoken have said. Maybe get the nod and move on. Mayor, does that sound reasonable? Jason?
Yes, so I think what I'm hearing as far as direction for me and my staff is we want to look at adding back a CUP process in R1 for those areas that very similar to draft 3 for the areas where the majority of the property has transitioned, and then possibly for areas that are 50% or more, we'll look at those numbers. And I think I heard some consensus on the buffer areas, looking at those and possibly bringing those back in. I didn't hear a consensus on whether it's a by right or by a CUP, so I'll get with my staff and we'll analyze that and come back with an option for you guys, and if y'all don't like it then we can make that recommendation for the change.
I would just add that my original position was no to the buffer zones. I'd like to maintain that after hearing Janice's comment and some of the other comments. I would prefer that the buffer zones stay R1 and be owner occupied only.
Okay, I can support that.
Please do.
When I was speaking about the two sets. I was only speaking in the context of CUPs. I was not speaking in the context of by right. So I want to clarify that I'm not talking by right.
I agree.
The other thing is too, on this noise, when they're talking about that, you know, the police, when they go out to a call or something like that on noise, they need something to monitor the situation by. You wouldn't want the police go out there and sit on the highway and have somebody come driving in and go, oh, I think they're speeding, I'm gonna go ahead and pull them over, I'm gonna write you a ticket. No, you gotta have something out there that these gentlemen can use in order to monitor the situation and say, you know, this is the level you're at, you know, this was the speed you're going, and then do the finding that way. I agree that the people that are renting the place should be responsible for their own actions. The owners, being in the nursing home business, I did 38 years of being on call for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So, if you're going to be an FTR owner and that's going to be your business, you better take care of your business. That's the way I feel about it. If you can take care of your business and do it right, I don't think you'll have a problem.
Jerry, thank you for your comments. Let's, excuse me, don't mind, we want to still stay on task on where we're at.
Are y'all doing that again?
We're gonna
Yes, I am.
We're gonna have an opportunity at the very end for a catch-all item where, if we want to talk about anything other than what's listed, they'll be wide open there for you, Jerry.
Here we go again.
Jason,
Okay,
did you
so
get a
Jason-
feel for what,
Yeah.
what council has indicated?
Yes, I do just want to clarify since we had a couple of last-minute tweaks. CUPs for islands and transitioning areas, but for buffer areas, it's next to commercial. Sounds like no by right or no CUP. Is that what I'm hearing?
By right would be STR B&B and STR accessory building.
Right, but I'm talking the unoccupied STR near as a buffer. No. No. Okay. Thank you. That's what I thought I heard.
Good enough.
Okay, Mayor.
That's German for good. Go ahead.
You ready to move to the next item?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Would that be recess? No, that's, I think this was
we
the
can
one
get
that was
through
going
this
to be
one.
the one we spend most time on anyway. Yeah,
Yes,
let's
sir.
move on to the next one.
Okay, Jason?
All right, so R2, really we are this is a continuation of the R1 discussion. A lot of the similar discussion points that we saw, except the only difference on this one is the addition of the STR facility. So as you know, R2 is our residential mixed district. We allow townhomes, duplexes, fourplexes, apartments, a little bit higher density. So on the R2, though, we still have the unoccupied. I think for that one, I think if council, and the direction I got for R1, we want to allow a CUP process, but the unoccupied in R2 is by right. And we'll talk the historic district in a little bit, so let's just focus on general overall R2 right now.
I think that we need, from the very beginning, we need to be talking that there are, we are talking about R2 that excludes the R2 in the historic district. Because the historic district is a totally, is its own animal. So block off the R2 that's north of Main Street, and we're talking about all the R2 that's south of Main Street, except for the R2 on Friendship Lane.
When you said black.
Mayor, I think Jason has just a little bit more to go.
Please.
Yeah.
So yes, on the R2, like I said, I want to break it into two categories, the unoccupied and the facilities, because those are different. So I just want to focus on the unoccupied right now. Right now in R2, outside of the historic district, we are saying that they are allowed by right. So there would be no CUP process because they're allowed by right. So, but as far as...
Excuse me.
Oh,
No new.
I can't, y'all are distracted by the conversation. Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think the R2 unoccupied, I haven't heard anything different, but I'm assuming if the thoughts are on the R1, I guess, are we okay with the unoccupied in all R2?
By
Just
right.
by right?
By right. Yes.
I believe so.
Even in the historic district?
No, we'll tackle historic districts separately.
I would also like to hear from P and Z, their opinions, because this is a joint meeting.
I have
Please.
something on R2. My concern is that R2, the place for duplexes, which is resident housing, is R2. And I'm concerned that if we allow STR facilities by right in R2, that will inhibit some of the duplex resident growth in those areas. So I think facilities should be moved over to a cut process in R2.
Well, let's hold
Sorry.
off on the facilities, just, I want to get some clarity on the unoccupied first, just so I can keep my notes straight, so. Anybody else on P and Z have discussion or concerns?
R2 by right.
R2 by right?
There's just not a lot of vacant R2 lots.
No, there's not.
I've been looking for them forever. There's not any. So as far as duplexes being built, that's kind of a fallacy unless you tear something down.
Yeah.
So R2 by right's perfectly suitable zoning for R2.
Okay, so I've seen a lot of head nodding. So Mayor, if you don't mind, I'll go on to, we'll focus now on the STR facilities.
So I understand R2 by right.
Yes, sir.
R2 by right. Thank you.
And I'll recap all of this as we get through
Thanks.
on this section. So R2, the STR facilities for R2, that is the big issue in those areas. Right now, you're allowed 8 units on a 10,000 square foot lot. And so there is no limit to the number of bedrooms or people who can sleep other than you're meeting the apartment style density. So they can get quite dense. We're hoping with our current proposed parking that'll lighten up. But we do need to focus on where these go. And again, I think the historic district is a different discussion, so we're going to talk all other R2. Keep in mind that once you start an STR facility, the state says you are now a place of lodging. That is classified as a hotel. You have to have one of those units up to 25, meet ADA standards. You have to have ADA parking. Since this was considered a hotel by the state, staff has said that our proposal is that these are adjacent to commercial properties. Because they are not technically or residential, the state qualifies them as a hotel. Technically, R2 doesn't allow hotel motel by right, so we said if we're going to allow the facilities in R2, they should be next to commercial. So before I get into some of the other issues, let's just kind of, if I can get some direction on whether folks are okay with them next to commercial, give me a little direction on that, and then we'll talk about other areas.
I'm in favor of facilities next to commercial.
And let me know if it's by right or by CUP.
I think you put enough restrictions in it with by setbacks, by density, by impervious cover, that this is going to be a restricted handful, maybe 5 lots in the whole town. So by CUP is probably the best way to control that.
I think, yeah, well, it's another set of eyes.
Correct. And you guys always get the opportunity to kick back what we send you anyway.
Right.
I would agree with CUP.
Agreed.
Jason, clarifying commercial, you're talking all commercial, C1, et cetera?
Yes, the way we're listing it in the code is actually non-residential zoning districts. So we do have some other zoning that's not commercial, the
MU.
airport, MU, manufacturing. We also did include PUDs that allowed commercial. So some PUDs are residential, some are mixed use. So basically we said if you're adjacent to any non-residential zoning district or PUD that allows a commercial component.
Just for clarification, what is considered a facility? 4 or more, or 3 or more?
More than one.
More than one? Okay,
Yes, sir.
so 2. Okay, gotcha.
Yes, because once you add that second unit, the state considers you a transient lodging.
we're saying, your question is to allow through a cup STRs if they're next to commercial in
For-
R2.
We're talking STR facilities. So whether, if they're next to commercial, is that by right or by cup?
Okay, I would say by cup also.
Yep, looking at a zoning map, there's a very finite amount of places where that's going to fit in anyway, so it's going to be,
5 lots.
it's going to be very restricted, but I go by cup personally.
Mr. Dooley, are you awake?
Mr. Dooley.
Yes, of course.
Okay. I haven't heard your voice yet.
Oh, yeah, I said cup to begin with, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I thought you were asking
Mayor,
for a
may I
cup of
comment?
coffee or something.
Blessings
Yes, please.
come in unforeseen packages at times.
Okay. I didn't
so-
mean to disturb you, Tim.
Now, that could change, that could change.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So I will,
Woke up to sleeping bag.
I will recap the direction I think I got. Again, we're talking STR facilities. Well, let me go R2, unoccupied, by right anywhere in the district is kind of the direction I'm getting from everybody. So I'll look at some possible regs there. The STR facilities, I'm getting that direction in adjacent to commercial, that possibly look at some CUP process for that, just so we can talk density and other issues. So I think for the general R2 zoning districts, I think I have enough direction to tweak those regulations. So at this point, I'll give it over to Clinton to see where we go next.
Thank you, Jason, appreciate it.
Any other input on this item? P&Z, council?
We love you.
We're ready to roll.
Yep.
Next.
Okay, so I think on this one, we are focusing on the historic district. So we're going to go back to the R1 standards. I think in this area, really for me, we've kind of set the parameters in the R1 district. There's not a lot of difference between R1 regular and R1 historic. So I think at this point, staff's probably thinking that in the historic district, STR unoccupied is still not allowed. I would probably look at doing the same cut process for the regular R1. But unless someone wants me to look at something different in the historic district or give me something else to think about, I'll go ahead and turn that question over to y'all.
How about if we look at CUP on the historic district abutting commercial?
That's what we had for R1, abutting commercial
So
anyways,
it's not different from in the historic?
unless y'all want it to be.
No, I don't think it should be.
Are there stranded parcels in the historic district?
There's stranded parcels all over, yes, ma'am.
So are we willing to do a CUP process in the historic district for stranded parcels?
So right now, the CUP process is going to apply to all R1, regardless of the historic district. I think what I'm looking for is, do we want to add some extra? The historic district is an overlay district, so that's our opportunity to say, hey, maybe there's some things that we wouldn't want everywhere else, but we want them here. So is there something y'all want to add to the historic district? I mean, from a staff perspective, HRB handles a lot of the review and orientation. Is there, unless there's something unless y'all are thinking maybe we don't allow it in the historic district, so.
Can you put the map up again?
And can we see the numbers again of historic district?
So yeah, let me go with the, let me show up the numbers just so we can have a count, and then I'll pull up the map. So in the historic district, R1, we have approximately 536 properties. Between active, pending, and closed, we have a potential for 149. So that's roughly total units to 153. Again, this is a higher density mixed area. There's a lot more R2. So we're roughly at 27%, or I'm sorry, 27% of the historic district R1 are short-term rentals.
guess you can superimpose the overlay.
This little line right here is the historic district. This little purple, white.
It's a big
area. So again, you know, a few years ago when we talked to our historic district and we talked about short-term rentals in that area, that was very close to Main Street and walkable. But we have since doubled the size of that district, so it does extend further up into our traditional R1 neighborhoods than what it historically has.
So refresh my memory, the green spots in here, historic district, are currently STRs?
Yes, sir. The orange ones are those that were pending permit review. The red ones were shown as closed, but most of the ones we researched were still active.
Sorry, Jason, can you restate where we're currently at with
R1?
R1 in the historic district?
So currently, all R1, even in the historic district, we are going to say occupied accessories are by right. I'm going to look at a CUP process for those that are sandwiched or surrounded or the neighborhood is transitioned. But I'm not going to be looking at any type of buffer or CUP along commercial. We'll just treat it as R1. So that applies to the historic district. My question is probably, should any unoccupied STR, even if you're the last one, be prohibited, or should we just let it follow the own R1 that I'm kind of looking at?
Or should just follow?
Sure.
My view is follow the R1. Because there's, under the new historic district, there is still a large majority of neighborhoods or occupied homes there, so I don't want to give that up by right.
The only two extenuating circumstances to maybe modify to make it lesser is, number one, the traffic on the three primary historic district streets, Austin, Travis, San Antonio Creek, are raceways. So you're not going to get those little cute neighborhoods with kids on bicycles. And the second thing is, that's probably the properties in our whole zip code that we should be doing everything we can to protect. And the easiest way to protect those is to make them financially viable. And STRs make them financially viable. So that's points that came from the crowd this morning that I never considered. That may be something to consider if we can come up with just a little lesser to help protect those. But I don't know how you do that.
I have one thought on how you do that, and that's go through the comp plan and do zoning changes. I think that process is going to identify future land uses of expansions of commercial areas, especially as you're talking Travis, the Nimitz, and those areas. So it's quite possible that part of the recommendations from that plan is that we rezone significant portions of the outer CBD limits and expand those areas. So I would prefer not to get into a special type of language where we're carving out blocks. I would rather tackle it as a whole situation, but if that's the direction you want to give me, I can craft some language that says STRs unoccupied between this street and this street and this street and this street would be allowed by right if we wanted to go that route.
I don't think there's need to complicate it. Let's address it in the comp plan.
So I think then the direction I'm getting is just treat R1 in the historic district as R1, everywhere else no special limitations. Okay.
Anybody head shaking here? I can't see any of them. Okay. Very good. Is there somebody?
No. I'll say one thing about the historic district. I have concerns of density, increasing density in the historic district. And I would like to, as part of our discussion today, are we going to talk about our ability to reduce density?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything else on that item? Okay, ma'am.
You think we should take a break? This is a good time to take a break, you think? No?
Keep going.
Keep rolling.
Don't go on, come back, let's go on.
Yep.
All right, so the next issue with the historic district is the historic district R2 properties. So same question for R2 unoccupied, not the facilities, just the unoccupied STR in the historic district. Do we want to treat them the same as we're treating the R2 in the rest of the city?
No.
What does that mean?
Yeah, do you have a comment about that?
Yes, sorry.
I think that that we need to be, that R2 in the historic district needs to be by cup. It's another set of eyes.
I would agree with that. You said that?
Tim Dooley.
There's been some discussion about rezoning those R2s because they're not really appropriate for R2. Can that be addressed in a rezone effort?
It could. We could tackle that. I don't know that I'd want to tackle it as part of this ordinance, but yes, if council wanted to direct me on our next council meeting to look at all R2 in the historic district and look at a rezone, we could do that. It is a down zone. I think
Is that
from
25 properties all total?
Or one?
It's more than that.
yeah, it's more than that. Let me see my stats. Hold on one second.
Jason, would that be a rezone? Would that be either to R1 or would that be, say, to the creation of a specific zone that might be named R2 Historic District or R2 Historic Overlay?
It could go either way. The comp plan could come out and say, hey, you outside of the CBD, you need a residential transition or tourism zone. I mean, there's a lot of things that could come out. If you were, from staff's perspective though, I would recommend against the down zoning from R2 to R1 in the historic district. And there's one reason, main reason why, is R2 is, again, our residential mix. That is the zoning district that allows the products that we are missing in the community. We're missing townhomes, we're missing duplexes, we're missing fourplexes. So I would hate to lose those properties and lose that density. So I think there is.
But the reality of that is so slim.
Right. And
vacant lots are selling for $600,000 in that historic district. How in the hell is that going to be a fourplex affordable?
The question is, are those the type of products that we want in the historic district?
I would have to ask my historic district chairwoman if she thinks that's the type of product we want. But that is the type of product our comp plan calls for right now because of its proximity to Main Street, because of its a higher density to, again, we're trying to get people in to where they can walk, workforce housing. I think from a standpoint on protecting, there's a way you can allow unoccupied STRs in R2 in the historic district while still incentivizing the higher build. You could prohibit the unoccupied, allow the facility only in commercial, or lower the density on the facilities to where a landowner in the historic district has a choice of, well, I could only build 2 STRs or I could build a fourplex, which money's out. So there's a lot of ways to do that, but I think we're getting kind of outside of our area of discussion as far as future zones. This really is, the way we're treating R2 right now in the rest of the city is STR facilities are next to commercial, and there's a CUP, unoccupied is by right, and the STR facilities are next to commercial with a cup. So we could continue that through the historic district. We could say the facilities are by right next to commercial, the unoccupieds are by right, thank you, and the facilities are a CUP, and we could treat them the same in the historic district, but we could limit the density on the facilities in the historic district, and I know that's been a concern of HRB for several months.
So we state what you just stated, and we address the zoning inequity in the comp plan, and let the historic dudes do what they want.
I would prefer that any major rezoning of areas be done through the comp plan, because it's very public and we can get everybody involved on what that looks like. Unless council tells me otherwise.
Well, I'd just like to add that so much of R2, which is in the historic area and around the middle school and all that, has never developed into an R2 type of area with multi-family dwellings and so forth. So it would make sense, as Jim suggested, to at some point zone those to something else that's much more like R1 type of zoning, if you don't want to call it R1 because, for whatever planning reasons. But I would definitely support that.
Okay. Well, again, I think the zoning rezone is probably for another meeting, another time. I
Right,
think,
but I don't want it to be lost. I think
so right now in all R2, for the STR unoccupied, we allow it by right. Do we want to allow it by right in the historic district, or do we want to do a CUP?
CUP.
A lot of head nodding. Okay, so I will explore CUP options for STR unoccupied in the historic district.
And,
In R2, yes, yes.
and on the facilities, discuss density.
Okay, well, first, I'm going to talk location and CUP
Okay.
before I get to density. Just let me finish my notes real quick. So now we are talking STR facilities. And in the regular R2, they are allowed next to commercial with a CUP. Do we want to continue that in the historic district?
No.
Jason, would you repeat that, please?
R2 facilities, in all of R2, we're allowing next to commercial with a CUP. Do you want me to look at some regs that match that, or do we want to do or not in the historic district?
What's the other choice? By right?
By right, or
Not at all.
or not at all? Or just next to commercial?
I'd say cup.
Cup next to commercial or cup anywhere?
I think the development standards in the HR, in the historic is stringent enough where it's going to catch 90%.
Sharon, what do you think? Pardon me.
I think cup, I think you want to,
Please, so we can all hear you.
out of the microphone.
We voice is loud, but we can hear you.
We, we thought we had a seat at the table, so some of us were here, but we don't. So we would like you to keep us where we have enough authority. We're really fighting with these things with the density and the facility and things abutting each other. But because there's so many different zones in the historic review, in the historic overlay, we really need the ability to address each property as it comes before us, because we're really struggling with it. Like the property over on Travis that goes all the way through the block, the people have been back 3 times now to try and get it, the density down enough that the board will improve it. But we don't have any guidelines in that area, and I'm not sure that we can create density guidelines. I think you've just got to let the historic review board have enough authority to address each one of them as it comes up. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Jason, if a recommendation comes from the Historic Review Board for an R2 property in the historic district, it's going to go then to P&Z, correct? And then it's going to go to council.
If I get some direction for the STR facility in the historic district next to commercial with a CUP, then yes, it would go to P&Z and council.
Sounds like a plan to me.
So I think the major issue with the R2 and what we've always dealt with in the historic district has been the density. I think we can tackle that on the next issue. I think it's just really, should I continue to move forward and develop separate standards for R2 as far as land uses and CUP, or do we just kind of follow what we did with all of R2? It's a CUP for the facility when it's adjacent to commercial.
If you could give us the numbers on percentage in R2 of STRs.
So
Historic R2.
Historic R2 is 270 total properties. Roughly 96 of them are some type of STR, accounting for 144 separate units, which is around 35% of our historic district properties.
So it seems to me we should consider whether we want any more at all. 35% is extremely high. I mean, cities around the state find 6% to be high. So,
But you don't have a breakdown whether it's in their CBD, their commercial, their historic, you just have a percentage.
No,
Because that's
no,
all.
that,
Historic.
No,
that
no,
is-
no,
that is
she's
only-
quoting cities around the state at
Oh.
6%, but where is it? I mean, there's an appropriate place for
I'm
it.
just
Gotcha.
saying that, 35 is really high. And to give you a comparison, there are areas that have, say 6 is high. I think that because it's an historic area, we should consider not allowing any more. 35% is plenty. You want more? You want 50% STRs? I mean, I
I don't like
know
using
where
the
you wanna
percentage.
go
I
with
think
this.
it's appropriate to the site, so.
well,
I
well,
don't
let
use
me,
the percentage.
I think we're getting off a little bit because we've already talked about the unoccupied STR, and
Correct.
we've
Just talking about
determined
facility.
that we are going to do that through the CUP process.
Correct.
So for the historic district in R2, the facilities staff is still recommending that they're only next to commercial.
Correct.
But do you want me to explore a by right or a CUP process for those?
CUP.
Okay, I think
And where would the commercial areas be?
Baxter Lane.
Along North Milam, along CBD, a little bit in the West Austin, North Edison area. I've got the zoning map pulled up, so I'm looking at
Yeah,
it.
I know you do.
Technology, maybe the old redneck in the bunch, but I'm learning.
Well, it's also the San Antonio and Austin Street, right?
So, I do want to touch on density for the STR facilities. So this has been kind of the major issue that we've seen with HRB when we're seeing the 8 units on a 10,000 square foot lot. I think some of the regs that we have regarding impervious cover, the upping of the parking requirements, I think that is going to be a natural reduction in the density just because you're going to have to make those numbers work. And so staff had originally in a prior draft proposed a maximum number of structures on these facilities within the historic district. We had settled on 1 structure per 5,000 square feet. Reason being was that council and P&Z kind of made the decision that a 4,500 square foot lot was too small of a lot to allow a short-term rental. So if we have a 10,000 square foot lot, just doing the math, that's roughly 2. But being that they are adjacent to commercial only and not allowed in the kind of interior of the historic district, do we want to consider additional units, a little higher density on those since they are adjacent to commercial? And so I can start crafting, whether that's 2 units, 3 units, or 4 units, but I do know 8 units has been very problematic for us in the historic district.
Was there any limit on how big the second structure could be?
No, because on a STR facility, those second structures are not accessory structures. They are considered a main structure as well. So it wouldn't be like in the STR accessory where you have the house and the second unit has to be smaller. These could both be the same exact size. It could be 2 1-bedroom, 1-bath casitas. It could be 2 5-bedrooms. but it would be up to the landowner to make the parking and the impervious cover and the setbacks and the fire apparatus and hose lay, all of that work.
So just for clarity, the new setbacks that are proposed in V4 plus the new parking requirements that are proposed in V4 are probably going to address this density issue. Is that correct?
They will a little. I'll take a project we approved at P&Z, the site plan. They originally came in, wanted 5 units. They could have had up to 8. But they decided they wanted to try and meet the new proposed regs. And so they added more parking. And it still wasn't as much parking as we're proposing. But they lost a unit. They went down to 4. I think if the parking stays the way it is, they probably would have gone down to 3 units on that site that we saw last night. And so I think it hits density, but I also think there needs to be some number there in case architects and developers will find a way around up and down. So, you know, I think, is there a density cap we want to look at in the historic district? Again, we are talking facilities only, and they're only adjacent to commercial.
I would say yes.
Cap?
Yeah.
Or densities?
Density.
Lowering density.
Okay.
Well, and actually the biggest issue about this whole is parking. So let's raise the parking limit. It seems like a simple way to do it.
Yeah, because if you recall, so they were looking at 4 short-term rental units. It was going to sleep 30-something people, I believe, 35.
Is that last night?
Yes. Under the current code, they only would be required 4 spaces. Under the proposed code, they would have to have 60% of that. So each parking space is, you know, it's not an insignificant amount of land. So I really do think density will be controlled. I'll look for, I see a lot of head shaking on lowering the density, so I'll do some research to see what a good number is. The only other thing that I do want to bring up in the historic district, and it's not on our agenda tonight, but there is a section in there that we're requiring fencing. When you have an STR, you have to do a privacy fence around your property. I probably won't address that with y'all. I'm going to meet with the HRB later this week, next week, to discuss that, because from the Historic Review Board standpoint, they're not a fan of privacy fences in the historic district, so this requirement would change that a little bit. But we also feel when it's a privacy issue, we're seeing a lot of neighbors come up and being forced to carry the cost of a privacy fence at $5,000 to $10,000 because of what's going on next door. So we felt that wasn't fair to them to make them burden. So I will bring that back to you. There may be some tweaks to that once we talk to HRB next week, so just a heads up on that. But what I think I've got in the historic district, just to recap before we move on, is R1, we're just going to follow what we're doing all over town. In R2, the STR unoccupied and the STR facility are both CUPs, and the facility is only allowed to adjacent to commercial through a CUP. So, and to look at lowering density. Does that sound about right to everybody?
Mayor, we're coming up on about an hour and a half, and we have 2 people that have to leave at about 2 o'clock.
It's just about 2 o'clock.
Take a break?
Well, if they gotta leave anyway.
I can stretch it to 2:30 if I don't mind.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I'd like to, at least before y'all leave, let's give you a chance if there's any other issue you want to tackle before you go.
Yeah. Just we talked a little bit about it in the hallway, just 5.4, the whole section.
Yeah.
Primarily the penalty stage. I mean, that seems to be the one that's
Jim,
the most punitive and the one that's the most.
Jim, I'm sorry, but this is one of the issues that we have to have some members recuse themselves on. And it's probably good we do it now, because if we have to lose some other members, we may not have a quorum anymore of P and Z. So.
Good idea.
Primarily what, Jim? I didn't hear your primary.
The penalty stage, the penalty.
Oh, penalty, okay, the penalty stage.
That's A.
So I will jump into number 5, enforcement and penalties. Staff originally proposed 6 violations. Staff is also not an attorney. Land use planning is my bag of chips. When it comes to enforcement penalties, my big concern is that if it's an issue, it needs to have teeth, and then I rely on legal and PD to help me find those teeth. Some situations are bigger than others. When we get into zoning violations, it's fairly easy. We have a zoning ordinance that I think allows up to $1,000 a day fines. We may be able to use that for some of these egregious, if someone's just operating without a permit and they refuse to stop, there's injunction relief. But as far as providing teeth to help the neighbor that has just regular issues with noise, sound, whether it's through bad guests or unattended operators, that's the issue. So I know we've lowered that down to 3. I think for most of the citizens and people I've talked to, there's issues with that. So I'm looking for as much and specific feedback as I get on this item. Y'all may need to discuss amongst yourself what those are, whether it's number of violations, if it's certain types that trigger, a certain type of code violation triggers a certain type of violation that counts towards a revocation, or if it's some type of tiered system, like if your sprinkler goes off on the wrong day, those don't count towards removing your STR permit. But if you have 4 noise violations in a 30-day period, I mean, that's every weekend. Do you lose your permit? Is it revoked? Are there fines? So I know Daniel has some, as I said, I believe there's some charter issues with how much we can fine. So I will just kind of listen and let y'all discuss from a staff perspective that's really arbitrary for this body. We don't have a lot of recommendations, but we do recommend that whatever it is, it allows the neighbor that is having issues, how do we help them? That's always been the key and the case, and that's what's been probably the trickiest part of this entire discussion and process. We have some ideas working with the Alliance on possibly adding some language for house rules. My understanding are you can't kick guests out unless they violate a house rule. Some STR owners have them, some don't. So we could implement house rules that said, or we could make it as part of the permit process. So we could do things like, no, the pool and hot tub and fire pit shut down at X time. I would have to rely on STR Alliance to see if they're with that type of logic, but they are okay with some that we had put on that they have to advertise the number of vehicles and parking that they have and all of that. So again, I think that helps as far as limiting the amount of times we would need to issue a violation, because that's what we're talking about. When we talk STRs, the major issue in the brunt of the complaints are what we call the witching hour, when the wine tours end and the bars close, and the neighbors are going to sleep. So I'll go ahead and turn that over to y'all, and y'all just kind of talk freely, and I'll make some notes, and we'll see what shakes loose.
Right now, it's too simplistic. It's going to take a matrix with severity. It can't just be, a sprinkler accidentally going on because we lost power or because the lawn guy hit it or something. Can't be the same severity as a noise complaint, and it can't be the same severity as a trash complaint. So those have to be somehow or another brought into a matrix where they're all fair and equal. The second thing is that everything we do, there is a board or a committee to hear grievances. We have the Board of Adjustments. I mean, we have all those in place. This simplistic that's being proposed now does not have that in place. And then I've heard a lot of talk today about the guests should receive the violation, but my thinking is the homeowner should also, because that is your guest. We talked about it in the hallway. If I had my brother come over and he's a drunk fool and he gets in trouble, it's my fault. So it should be a combined. That's just my thinking. I'm thinking out loud. But those 3 things ought to be kind of put into this. Just the way it is now, it's just too simplistic.
Bobby, if you don't mind, I've got a bail. I do have.
Go ahead, please do.
At the end of Jim there. I concur with Jim's last part of his statement there, especially regarding that we must put some of the onus on the property owners. One of the gentlemen seated out there used the analogy of borrowing Tom's truck and having the wreck, and that was him. I'll use a very similar analogy. There are many firearms companies that have sold firearms. They're not the ones pulling the trigger, they're the ones being sued. So therefore, we have the ability to punish the owners, because if it's a continued issue that these houses, these party houses, as one gentleman addressed, and there's many of them, continue to operate, we have to give our citizens back some rights and some sleep. We owe our citizens some sleep on a Saturday night.
And so I think at that point, the word that you used was continued. So I think what we need to be talking about, the elephant in the room is revocation of a very valuable permit. So I think that we need to be very clear on revocation. The first thing that comes to my mind is this is the way you get your permit revoked. Number one, you operate without an STR permit and you won't get a permit. Number two, you operate as an STR and you don't pay your hotel taxes, you get your permit revoked for a period of time. Okay. I mean, we're talking about this is an economic product. So what we have to now we're talking about what our goal should be is we're trying to change behaviors, okay? We're trying to change behaviors of maybe serial abusers, okay? I believe that this is going to be a partner, that has to be a partnership between the city of Fredericksburg, who represents the citizens, and the operators of STRs in our community. Because I think that everybody is, you know, every profession has bad actors. And what we're trying to do is modify the behavior of the bad actors, and if they won't have their behavior modified, then they need to get out of the business. Because I know that the people that are in the STR business that are serious about it, they don't want bad actors because it's bad for business. So I think what we have to do is, you know, this whole idea of 3 strikes and you're out. Okay, I leave my trash can out, my water goes off, and my crabby neighbor calls the cops on me. I lose the potential of $15,000 a month that helps me pay my mortgage. I think we need to be very careful about that. But I do think that for serial abusers, that we need to have a step process that the way you get people's attention is you hit them in the pocketbook. And it's because money talks, and say, okay, we have an administrative process, and you know, we've got the municipal court process, and I don't know what our ability to increase fines per violation, but eventually, if you're able to do that, when they get hit with okay, well, your fine today is $750, and oh, that's easy. I'll just write that off. And they come back next week, and it's okay. Your fine is $1,500, and then it's $3,000, and then it's your firstborn child, and
that's easy.
Yeah.
It's just that
your oldest grandchild. Yeah.
That graduated matrix I was talking about. If we can set it up that way where it's more, it bites you even harder. But there still should be some
discretion in there.
Discretion in there, and also there should be some way to. I mean, I keep thinking about that. If I operated an STR next door to my ex-wife, she'd be calling me every day, all day long. So I keep thinking about the fact that could happen.
Well, and I think
bad investment strategy.
Yeah, I think
it technically could happen.
I think that we do that. There are people in any community that are so against STRs that they're going to say, okay, I'm going to call the cops, and they're going to come out and they're going to say, oh, there's no violation, or I'm going to take pictures of the trash can and send in. They're going to do anything they can, knowing that all they need is to stick them with 3, and the permit goes away.
That's dangerous.
And, yeah, and that's too much.
Yeah. I agree, and I applaud all you, the operators and everyone that spoke on needing the house rules. I would love to see y'all get those together and work with staff on making that part of the permitting process. I think that's what we need as a community, to make everybody accountable. You're going to come to our community, you're going to all be good citizens.
Right.
I think we need to pursue that very heavily and get some of the onus and the back on those visitors as they come to our community. But I agree also that if it's continuous and the operators are not taking care of it, that we do need to have some fines.
We need to do something. You know, this seems to be part of the I Love Fredericksburg process that's being rolled out by the CVB, and there's a lot to that. You know, I want people that come to our community to enjoy the community, but I also want them to respect what many of us have spent 30 or 40 years trying to develop. And for us to understand that this community has always changed, you know, but we've always tried to preserve things that make us unique in the world. And if you don't like us, go to Granbury.
Go to Port Aransas. I can get you.
Granbury won't let them in.
We'll take them.
Yeah.
I really like the house rules. I'd like for them to be consistent, and for all the operators to adopt them, and that it be a part of the permit process. I don't think I want to make sure that the house rules aren't just STR operator, favor STR operators, but also favor the neighborhoods, the city, must do that. I like the idea of fining the renters, and I think it needs to be graduated. The first fine is X dollar, the next fine is 2X, the next is you're out of here. But if there is an operator that's a repeat offender, we need consequences for that operator. And if they continue to have guests that violate the house rules and police are called out and they're continually fined, if they lose their license for 90 days, that's fine with me. So
I pretty much agree with what Bobby just said. I think, you know, if you get a sprinkler violation, because anybody can get one if something happens to your box, and it's, I think one of those is probably not worthy of a citation, but two, you know that the box needs to be fixed or whatever it is, even though a sprinkler is probably in the lower tier of egregiousness, it's still something. And so multiple of those is probably worth a higher level of complaint. Probably noise being the worst when we're talking about penalties. I mean,
but I would add to that sprinkler, trash, well, trash maybe not so much, because STRs generate a lot of trash and typically have more trash cans, and but as far as the sprinkler, I mean, I think they need to be treated just like a typical resident. I mean,
right, I agree.
You get a fine, you don't get evicted from your house. So,
right.
Yeah, take that out of the way.
Well,
Yeah.
Use some common sense, you know?
Exactly.
I mean, the officers, when they go to a situation, they have to have something in order to monitor it. You just can't have them walk up there and say, well, this is what it is. No, you have to have something, a device that's going to, like I said, a radar gun to get you for speeding, or a noise monitor in order to figure out what the volume is. You have to have that, but then you can use common sense. Give them a first warning. Say, hey, you know, you got to hold this down, or, you know, next time I come back here, it's going to be more serious. And then go ahead and stick it to them. You know, give them the opportunity to hold it down, and if they don't want to do that, if they just want to be an a-hole, then go ahead and then stick it to them.
And I would like to see the P&Z maybe kind of discuss how this could work. Some of you have more familiarity with what the problems are with it,
Right.
have as an owner. So maybe you could bring back something to us.
And also the
That's gotta be part of it.
Also, I think the STR Alliance.
STR Alliance too,
And
you
the
think
owners,
that's gonna be part of it?
would have some, they need to have some discussions and make some recommendations. I mean, they're in the business.
And whatever the ordinance is, we can still be good neighbors, you know? Just because they could get dinged for trash doesn't stop me from helping put the bag back in the container if need
Right.
be. You know, like as residents, we can still be nice to each other, regardless of if it's an STR owner or not.
Good point.
So
You know-
just out of curiosity, was the local contact response 30 minutes, has that changed from B1 to?
That did reduce, the original time was an hour. Staff may want to revisit that. Your local contact, I mean, if it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and they're across town, yeah, they could probably get there in that time. But if it's a balancing act. I mean, if it's 3 a.m. and someone lives, you know, right outside the city limit or past the airport and they're the local contact and they get a call, I mean, just to wake up and get dressed and drive.
How is this going to work? Is the call's going to go into PD at 3 in the morning and PD's going to stay there until you show up in 30 minutes? So I'm confused about how that can even be measured.
Well, that's what conversation we'll have. So we've been kind of back and forth on whether it's PD handling the issue or the property manager handling the issue. I would say at this point, we're probably leaning towards, you know, if the property manager wants to set things up, I know Randy and them have talked about sound monitor devices and all of those things. If they set those up to where they can hear of an issue before it generates a police call, then that's their opportunity to address it. I think we do have to have a local contact that can at least reach out to PD. Maybe they don't have to show up, but remember, we are going to have all STRs going to have a BECA license. So when that police officer shows up, he's going to have the operator and the management company's contact. So that's really what, that was a holdover from the original ordinance. So we may take that out since now we don't really need it because PD will have access to that operator owner. So we'll have to look at that, but I think I've got a lot of good direction from this body, so I'd like to recap on what I've heard on enforcement and penalties, unless there's someone that wants to add something.
I have a question. Court system, how does that work? I mean, who sees these violations and who rules on them?
Well, that'll be, Daniel, you want to?
Municipal court.
Okay. City manager has no control over any of that.
Well, you're talking about over like if a citation's issued for watering or something?
Right.
So there's a proposal, if you remember, the council created that administrative hearing process, which is a civil process. So once that is, I mean, that's been created by ordinance. I don't know that the administrative side of that has been established yet. Once that's set up, some of the violations could go to that in lieu of going to municipal court. But that would be at the discretion really of the officer or whoever initiates that. So I don't know what you mean as far as city manager.
Well, you say administrative. Okay, I don't have my trash can. I have a trash can violation. Ray gives me that. Who do I go see to clear that up?
It could either be the municipal court, or it could be the hearing officer when that process is
Whoever that
up
hearing
and running.
officer might be.
Correct.
Okay.
And
It could be the city attorney.
It would not be me.
Okay, well, that eliminates that.
I'd like to follow up a little bit.
Thanks for the clarification on who it is.
Sure.
When we establish that process, staff's preference is to have all of the minor issues, the trash and the water, go through that administrative process. That's why we set that up. We did not want to take folks to court because their sprinkler system went off on the wrong day, or they didn't bring their trash can in 24 hours after. So I think those go to the hearing officer. I don't think noise. I think that goes to court just like it always does, because that is a major issue. But
And we don't want those to be reasons to revoke a permit.
right.
Correct.
So what I'm hearing from the discussion, unless there's, one last go-around if anybody wants to make a comment before I recap. What I'm hearing is staff needs to come up with a matrix with tiers and types of violations, show which court process they would go through, some type of escalating fines, implement some house rules. I've already had conversations with Guest House and Tammy and Cozy, so I think we can continue those conversations and get some language that we're all comfortable with. And then what I'm hearing is, no one has said it, but I'm hearing revocation is a last resort kind of deal. And so I would probably put some type of possible appeal system in there where maybe you weren't having a ton of violations as far as noise, like say cops go out there and because we know what happens when PD shows up on a street. Everybody gets quiet. And so maybe there's not a noise violation. But if PD gets called, you know, frequently, do we have a last resort appeal to say, hey, after 30 days, you will come in for a special arbitration or hearing? Staff will look at some type of combination of those regs, but I think what I'm hearing is revocation is last. We want to go escalating. We do want to hold the guest and the owner responsible for their businesses. So I will, I think I've got a good framework we can start with. I'll work with Daniel. Yes?
Still, we're not abandoning the number. For example, if there's 3 noise violations, that's pretty bad.
Well, I think right now I'll probably look at, you know, is that 3 in a year, 3 in a week, 3 in a day, 3 in a, you know, something. I think we'll just
Isn't
work.
that part of the matrix?
Yes, I think we'll try and have a kind of common sense approach. I've been visiting regularly with owners and operators, but I've also been visiting regularly with citizens. So
But it would be part of the matrix, but there should be a number. I mean, at some point.
yes, and that's what
Okay.
we'll kind of do is at some point you hit it. What that is, like I said, I'm not a punishment guy. So if y'all don't like what we propose, we'll try and do something fair. But then that's what P&Z meeting is for, and that's what the council final meetings, we can make some minor tweaks to that, but we'll try and get something that's fair for all sides and has some teeth.
Well, my concern from what I heard today was, you know, if they're with Airbnb, they have to cancel their bookings and et cetera, and, you know, that 90-day period really could put a longer time on the crunch on them.
Mm-hmm.
I would like, and I'm just speaking for myself, I would sure like for some feedback on that, you know, to a 30-day,
Okay.
you know, 30 days to operate, to shut down that's just, in my opinion, a pretty significant bite in your pocketbook.
Well, we'll take a look, kind of see what shakes out with the fines. Again, I think the house rules is what's going to be key, because that does give the owner the ability to kick someone out without getting punished by Verbo. So, again, if we can find combinations of some just courtesy type house rules that help neighbors, I really do think that limits the possibility of even calling the police to even issue a citation. So I think if everybody works together on that, I think we can find some. And again, I'm looking at people I met with recently. We'll get together and get that. So did I miss anything on?
So Jason, I want just to be clear. One other point is I think that I would like recommendations from your office on what are the death penalty violations that would, because that's it. What are the death penalty violations that would lead to the revocation of a STR permit?
Again, that matrix should address it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what?
It could be a combination of 2 murders and
Right.
open your eye out.
Right,
Just
right.
one murder. I mean, it could be,
Right.
it just depends how you set it up.
You know, I just don't see revoking a permit for watering violations or having an overstuffed trash can.
Well, you know, a perfect example, overstuffed trash cans means you're required to have 2 damn trash cans.
Well, I personally think that you need to have a trash can for every 4 visitors.
Exactly.
So if you have 5, you get 2.
Yeah, exactly. So that is not as severe as 3 overstuffed trash cans and you lose your license. That's more severe as 3 set of trash cans, you gotta get more trash cans than we're gonna charge you for.
Yeah, $100 a
In
month.
most communities, trash is picked up twice a week. So that's probably why we have overstuff.
Do commercial rates.
Same thing.
City isn't in the business of doing commercial
So
garbage.
I'm saying
That's
there's-
right.
There's just other options.
Well, you're right, Mr. Dooley.
Yeah, I know,
So,
well,
bullshit. Jerry mentioned bad actors earlier, and this bad actor has to leave, so I'm gonna exit. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, G. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux.
see you.
Now it's break time. She said I can come back when I'm done. Okay, where are we gonna go after break? You know, when we let people know.
I have one question.
Who's got a question?
I do. What about, we are all talking about best practices and house rules. What about the operators that don't subscribe to that?
Molotov cocktail.
Yes, I'm looking to you because we've been looking to you.
Randy, would you stand up so everybody can hear you? Thank. Oh, we already know who you are.
A year ago.
Well, that's close.
Yeah, the code violations, the codes apply to all, right? We believe that we can write best practices, and we believe that we can probably affect and influence 75% of the population. There's going to be 25% outliers, right, for the next engineer. You're going to have something you're going to have to manage through pain of financial issues, loss of their operating rights, those types of things. I think, but by and large, the larger audience here wants to comply and wants to work well.
But if we came up with a best practices house rules that are implemented with the permit process, then they don't have a choice.
That's right. Absolutely. That gives us legal rights then to take somebody and remove them from the property.
And if they refuse to use those, then we have the ability to take their license
that gives
away.
us some teeth. To your point, I talked to Ernie Hoffer about this as well as taking some of those best practices. We want to collaborate with Ernie to make sure that's part of the broader marketing campaign and bringing down the property into the reservation companies as well and be consistent.
That's up to them. They're the ones that are experts on best practices.
Does anybody have a specific question for the young lady?
She's a lot smarter than I am.
Well, that's easy to do, Randy.
It's all right.
Thank you, though. Appreciate your wanting to.
I will follow up with most of all of y'all in the next week or so.
Okay. So where will we go next after break?
Conditional use permits.
Okay.
We have two more items on there.
I'm going to say 5 minutes, and I will ring the bell.
Not a beer, it's HEB carbonated.
Okay, it's been 5 minutes.
You want another half a cookie?
Brian, is there anybody out in the hall?
No, you tell Jerome and then he'd really give me hell.
Well, thank you for those who haven't left yet. We appreciate your attendance, P&Z and council, and neighbors. Okay, we're ready to go. Clinton, you go on.
Okay, so this section, we have several sections of our code. It's kind of weird that are broken up where they talk about conditional use permits. We talk about it in the planning and zoning section. There's some criteria, and then there's one section here that talks about conditional use permits, and we added some language to that. The language we added is kind of out of our other section, so it's a copy and paste, just so people have them in the same area. But what generally, when we talk evaluation criteria for CUPs, generally most cities keep those somewhat nondescript or vague because, again, the CUPs are for unique circumstances or specific to certain properties. And if you write them too direct, you really can't use them the way they're supposed to be used. So in this instance, I know from my conversations with most individuals, I believe their concerns with the evaluation criteria stemmed from really, I think 3A or 3C. It was the language that discusses within 600 feet, what is an adverse impact. I can't define what an adverse impact is per se because it depends on what the use is and what we're talking about. We have to keep in mind that the CUP process is not specific for short-term rentals. This is our CUP process for everything. So I don't want to get too far into weeds and criteria. I am looking for feedback on maybe specific portions of that section that you don't like or want us to take out. And then if there's some language you'd like to add, I'd be glad to put that in there. But again, remember the CUP process goes for everything, not just short-term rentals. We did add some specific. There's some language in there that talks about 500 feet from commercial. Odds are that language will change based on the direction I was kind of given today. So as I tweak the draft on R1, R2 CUPs, I may tweak these criteria a little bit more. So
75.
I will open up the floor to conversation, and y'all can ask me some questions or direct me on some things that you like or don't like or want to take out or want to modify. So I'll go ahead and open it up, Mayor. Hand it over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for the P&Z members who recused themselves returning. Well, yeah, you might have pulled out and gone home. Thank you for coming back. Questions?
Are we looking at section 5.400 on page 75 or 5.460? Because Polly mentioned the redundancy there, and are we going to cut one of those out or not?
We can. That's okay. Yeah, let me pull it up. Let me pull those sections up real quick.
What page was that?
75 is the first one, and then 82. They look identical to me.
So yes, I'm sorry. What was the second page? Let me start with that one.
Page 82, 5.1.
So yes, this review and evaluation criteria, this was in our section of code. This is what we use for conditional use permits. The reason I pulled it out of here and added it to the other section was because it was called conditional use permits, and I thought they should go together. So I think a lot of this really is more of just housekeeping that Daniel and I probably need to do to clean up the code and maybe put it all into one area. So I don't want to get into the weeds on which one and which section because they're both going to do the same thing. It's just a kind of quirk in our code. You'll notice that we have those in several others. We have descriptions of residential use types. Well, those are just the definitions from the residential definitions from our definition sections that got copied. So we definitely want to take out that kind of double spot. So that's why they're in the other part. So I don't want to focus on where it goes. I just want to focus on what it says or what it means at this point.
Mr. Dooley. Jason, what kind of appeal process does anybody have for something like this? Because there's been some concern, I think, amongst some members of the audience that are here present, as well as some that were here earlier, that this responsibility and this interpretation lies solely with one person at City Hall.
So
And there's some concern that you get crossways with this one person and there's punitive action, or you come today and you get turned down, and next week you bring something completely different and you get turned down and you're getting picked on.
well, that is me. I am that one person.
Thank you for clarification, like Mr. Jones.
Yes, so
All right,
that,
now, then stop right there. What's the appeal if I don't like what you said, Jason?
if you don't like what I said, then you can appeal my decision to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. At that point, we will go before that board. I will show my case as far as what I feel the code says and does, and they will show their case on what the code says and does. And then at that point, if I've wronged someone on the ZBA, then they'll have their opportunity to get me back. But there's going to be that concern with everybody. I don't know any way to alleviate that concern than to have folks come, sit, visit with me, and talk to me, and know that I'm not that type of person. If I was a vindictive person, I can tell you this draft would look a lot different than what it does. So, you know, that's all I can say, sir.
Let me say this from the very beginning. I started my career on these boards as a member of the Board of Adjustment years and years and years ago, when Coy Summers was here, okay? And at that time, he rewrote the application for a Board of Adjustment appeal, okay? And then, has the form changed much in 25 years?
You know, we haven't had a application since I've been here. We had one and it got withdrawn. The form has been tweaked a little bit. There's some state law changes in the past 25 years that probably was the impetus of that form change. There's some findings that people have to make to do a zoning board of adjustment case. It has to be, you know, can't be financial in nature. It can't be a self-imposed, you know, you can't scrape a lot and come to the board and say, well, I can't meet my setbacks because I'm designing, you know, a 12,000 square foot house on a 10,000 square foot lot. You know, there's some things that has to be unique to the property, either size, shape, topography. So it's kind of spelled out, but there are some times where definitions are interpretive. I will make those. I think anybody that's worked with me in the last year knows that I generally tend to interpret on the side of facilitating development. I think that's our role here, and that's what my job is to do. So I'll continue to do that to the best of my ability.
And Jason, I'm not picking on you, I'm
Yes,
picking
you
on
are.
the form, because when I was on the Board of Adjustments and Coy Summers wrote that application, Jesus Christ could not get a variance.
Right. Here,
And I actually,
And I mean that.
No, I know.
I really mean that.
I remember you actually told me the same exact thing during my interview, and
Yeah.
you grilled me about that form. So
Good. At least I'm being consistent.
yes, you are, sir.
let me piggyback on Mr. Dooley. Is there an appeal beyond the Board of Adjustment?
At that point, it is it district court, Daniel?
Okay, here's the problem that I've got, is we are giving the final appeal judgment to an appointed board in the city of Fredericksburg, not an elected board, not people that are elected by the citizens of this community. We are telling a group of people who might meet twice a year, if they show up at the meeting when it's called, that they have the power of life and death over this issue. And I think that we need to have that there needs to be an ultimate appeal to the elected body of the city of Fredericksburg.
What say you, Daniel?
then they can, if they don't like what we say as elected officials, then they can hire the lawyer that's representing the other groups in town and take the case to the 216 Judicial Court.
I'll have to check the statutes because the Board of Adjustment is pretty strictly controlled by statute, the composition and how they have to comport their meetings, and you know, the majority they have to have 4 out of 5 to approve something. So if that's not prohibited, then we could certainly add that as an additional step. But if that ability doesn't exist, then the remedy is going to be judicial at that point.
Okay.
All right.
So there, yeah, it's
Okay.
the law.
Thank you.
So if we're done with my trial and we can move on to the next round, again, there's some language in here. I fully expect we need to tweak that based on what's going to come up on the tweaks that I'm going to do regarding conditional use permits. So I don't want to focus too much on what it says now, but if there are specific sections or language you do not like or want me to specifically look at, please let me know so that we can focus on those. And if you have some suggestions, I'll be glad to take those as well.
So I have one question, is on A3. The request will have no adverse effect on any property within 600 feet. Isn't the notification zone
200.
like for
200.
It's 200 feet.
200?
So state law requires 200 feet. That's what they say is the area that landowners are affected by. So we could match state law. The 600 feet comes from our existing code on our site plan review criteria. So we were just trying to be consistent.
Okay, but because the question I have is, we can say 600 feet. How far is that? Is the average lot, is that, say from the back, I'm gonna pick on you and use the back of your house on Burbank Street.
Okay.
Okay, so 600 feet south, how far is that? And then 600 feet west, we don't want to go east because
that's the city limit line. So
you're in the cow country.
Yeah, if I'm going south, say someone asked for a CUP, everybody will be noticed. From my back property line, my neighbor behind me has a 180-foot deep lot. So there's almost two. So the right-of-way is going to be 40 feet, so there's 220. And then we're going to have two more 180 foot, so, block and a half. Yeah,
okay, so we're getting close to college?
Mm-hmm. So we can tweak that if y'all want to make it more match the notification legal requirement. I think the reason it's in there, again, we copied this from our site plan.
Right.
When we approve site plans, we're looking generally at commercial developments. Mm-hmm. And so commercial developments can affect properties that far away, and it's mostly in regards to traffic, as we have turn movements and radius and stacking and queuing. The last situation is we want to get into is
so
that.
Can we delineate that? Can we say 600 feet for commercial developments and 200 feet or 250 feet for residential?
Yes.
Residential type uses?
Yes, we can do that.
Because I think there is a difference.
There is.
Would you like that to match the notification requirements then?
Well,
yes.
Yeah.
It makes a little bit more logical sense to 200.
I'd go 200.
So,
You want to recap that?
yeah.
So on A3, I heard we'll just tweak that language to add some residential adverse effects, and we'll bring that down from 600 to 200. I'd like to leave the other one in there again, just because the CUP is going to apply to other things. Again, on I think it's B 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Some of that language will stay the same. These numbers can adjust. We may clean it up a little bit. That's one thing that we haven't done is this hasn't gone through the legal review for just language, just to make sure everything says what we think it says. But they are general guidelines that we put in there because, again, if we're talking the person that's got 50% of their houses and they want to ask for a CUP on their block, if it's in Carriage Hills, that probably doesn't make sense to recommend. But if you're 500 feet from Main Street, that's probably a factor that we would consider. So that's the way it's written, kind of how it is. I know for most lay folks and non-planners, it reads worse than stereo instructions. But for my team, I mean, we look at it, know what it means. So we'll try and clean it up, put in a little more layman's terms, but we don't want to kind of rewrite it to where it just doesn't work for planning purposes.
Question about the spec on the 600 feet, 200 feet. Supposing somebody wants to put in an STR under this cut process, wherever, and within 200 feet are a majority are STRs. So if you get comments back and the majority are, it's okay, and I don't know how STR owners feel about having more STRs in their block. So I don't want to make any assumption here, but
well, I think that's, I mean, in that situation, if I notified, say, 8 landowners and 7 were short-term rental properties, I would say that area is transitioned, and that's probably one that needs to transition further. But, you know,
so you would say
right, for my staff recommendation, again, that's got to go through P&Z and council. I mean, I've recommended things here and gotten them denied, so I have no concern that y'all would put me in my place when the time comes. So when it comes to that, the language, I think that's why we write it the way we do. You know, again, if they're all surrounded, then we take that into account. Now, if we had someone that was there, they were the one that protested, but maybe they were right next to it, and their concerns were noise, hot tubs, late nights. At that point, council can consider, hey, we're not going to let you have a hot tub, and you have to have inside time at 10 p.m. or something like that. But that's why staff likes the cut process, because it does give us a chance to impose certain conditions on certain circumstances, and that are unique to individual properties.
And those conditions could change over time.
And
Yes.
that perception, that way of looking at it probably is in violation of our comprehensive plan,
Well,
which requires that our neighborhoods be livable.
Right. But we also have comprehensive plans that say we find areas for these things. So, you know, if, again, that subjectiveness is going to come through the boards and commissions. I'm going to do what I can professionally to lay out the facts, you know, but, and those will change with the boards and commissions themselves, but that's the cut process. They are not unique to any, it's not a one size fits all. It is for uniqueness of tracks. So is there any other criteria, though, that y'all want me to specifically look at or add? You know, again, this is meant to be somewhat vague. It's a general guideline. You know, if there's issues you have, it sounds like everybody probably wants me to look at these, but I don't hear any major concerns with any. So if you do have those and you think of something tonight or tomorrow morning, or you just have that epiphany, I mean, as always, just email me or come meet with me and we can get that tweaked. But I do need that epiphany to happen pretty quick just because of my turnaround time. So just something to keep in mind.
So Jason, section B, you're going to rework that to match what your guidance was on the qualification for CUP.
Yes, ma'am.
So these are going to change.
Yes, because the CUP criteria is going to change, so that might change. So all of this, that's what I originally said. The higher up on this draft that we make a change, the more subsequent changes have to be made further down. So that CUP process was pretty high up on the chart, so there may be quite a few things that need to be tweaked.
Very good. Clint?
I'm going to move on to.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Other short-term rental issues. Jerry,
This is your shot, buddy.
I don't
What?
know if I want to.
Oh, y'all are leaving for good? Oh, well, you don't look that old.
Yeah, we need it. Yeah, let me pull up my, where are we at? Okay, other short-term rental issues, vested rights, non-conforming uses, and grandfathering. This is the single biggest concern outside of enforcement provisions that I probably had to deal with as far as number of customer contacts and concerns. So there's several folks or several types of folks that are going through this process. I don't have a lot of concerns for those folks that are pulling permits that have gone through the DRC process. They've had some conversations with us. They've either replatted or they've done a building permit because once you pull that permit or submit that application, you are grandfathered under the rules in effect at the time. So say you haven't pulled your short-term rental permit, but you have a building permit that's going on right now. And Daniel, correct me if I misspeak on any of this. If it is a series of permits that you need to achieve your goal, then it goes with the first permit. So you can't get an STR permit until you have a building to inspect. You can't inspect the building until it's built. You can't build it until you submit that building permit application. So even though your STR permit may not come in till after a possible ordinance change, the building permit is a series, so we would go and say, okay, your permit was received on this date, you were grandfathered under those rules and regs at the time. Am I correct on that one? Thank you. So we are flagging, once we do the registration process, we will have to re-register through Granicus as we go through our new vendor. We will start flagging and asking folks when they submit to submit any existing permits they have. That way, through our GIS and mapping, we can start tracking those as the year and the rules are in effect. So they would be pre-2021. And then once we get new permits, we'll flag them as rules 2022. And then if we make tweaks 6 months down the road, then those will be under those regs. So that's how we do that. As far as continuation of the use, again, oh, go ahead.
One question on that. What if someone closes on a piece of property today with the intent that it's going to be an STR? They have to go get the plans, all that has to be submitted to get a building permit. So when does it start? If I told my realtor, find me a piece of property that can do an STR in R1 today or 6 months ago or whatever, but I closed today and it's known that that's my ultimate use, do I qualify?
Legally, under Chapter 245, if you have not submitted any type of application or permit, you would not qualify.
Okay.
So that is one of the concerns I have with the second group of folks. So the people that have permits in now, we know about them.
Right.
We go through DRC. I talked to Tammy about this recently. People that have done CUPs have gone through DRC, but they're 18 months out to construction and completion. We know about those. We're documenting those. Those will move forward. The ones I have concerns about are the person that's going through a residential remodel. They don't need any building permits because it's all cosmetic, it's flooring, it's paint, it's sheetrock. And they're not following this issue, and they've never been into my office, we've never talked to them, and they're 30 days away from their first rental, and they apply for their permit and we deny them. Those are the ones I'm worried about. You know, my policy has been is if you've talked to me or we've done something, or if you can show proof. If you can show me an email that said, you know, Bobby, if you sent an email 30 days ago to your real estate agent that said, find me a short-term rental, that would be something I would consider. Now, it goes back to what Tim was saying, if I don't like you, I'm gonna say no, and then you're gonna have to appeal to the board. It's gonna be hard to do because, you know, part of me wants to facilitate that and help where I can, but I also know that there are people out there that are just gonna say they plan to do it when they never did. And so how do we do that? So if I can get legitimate documented evidence, an old email that said, hey, I really want to do this short-term rental, start looking, you know, I will probably take that. But if it's just an email with a house floor plan and no date, and it just has handwritten STR on it, I don't know that I can guarantee that permit, and so I probably won't support that.
Okay, Jason, then how about this? Wouldn't this be, couldn't you get help on this issue from the real estate community so that when I close on my piece of property and, I mean, I've talked to the real estate agent and she knows I'm looking for.
Or he.
Or he. Us bald guys will stick together, Charlie. That I'm looking for a piece of property to do some kind of STR thing, then I would think that at that time the real estate agent might be able to say, if you start any kind of work on your house, you're going to put in a new floor, new cabinets in the kitchen, go ahead and pull a building permit with the city, because then what that will do, even though you don't have to pull a building permit, you go in and get a building permit, because that becomes documented proof that you started the process at that time.
Well, if they pulled a building permit, I would go off of that. I mean, that's...
Okay,
that's
well, that's my whole issue there, is that we have, I'm sure, we have people who, they're purchasing property with the intention in the future, but they know, I don't know when I'm going to do it, but I know I'm going to do it. And so the issue is, when did they make the decision? And if we have to wait until 3 years down the line, I'm at a financial point in my career where I'm going to make the decision. That 3 years down the line might be too late.
Well, I think that's a tough scenario to work through. I don't know that I have an answer for that. I will tell you it's probably a little bit unlikely. You have to remember that they pulled that permit and they're vested under these rules and regs, but now they're non-conforming once we change those rules. And so they have to maintain that use for, let's say in your instance, 3 years. That means they have to be using it as a short-term rental. And if they go 90 days without it.
No. What I'm saying is they're not pulling an STR permit. They are pulling a building permit, even though they don't have to they're putting a new floor in. They don't need a building permit to put a new floor to put new tile in your kitchen, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so, but if I go in and say, hey, I need a building permit to put new tile in my kitchen because I'm intending this house to be an STR at some time, isn't that, at that point, isn't that documented proof that they have informed the city, this is the intention I have with this piece of property?
I'm going to answer that from a planning perspective on my thoughts, how I would approach it,
Okay.
and then I'll lean on Daniel to maybe talk about the vesting rights.
Isn't that as good as an email to you?
Let me talk it through first. So someone pulls the permit to vest themselves. Once the work is done, we close that permit out.
Okay.
If you have not gone to the second portion, which is the next phase, the STR permit, you know, I don't know that I can hold off that long for 3 years, because generally if you have an approved site plan, it's only good for a year.
Right.
And so you either have to act or it goes away. For me, you have to show a legitimate, true faith effort to make that move. Because I've had that situation. We had a woman pull a permit on a vacant lot because she wanted to do one when her kids went to college. Her daughter was 8. I told her I cannot vest that. That is just not something that I would do. So again, that does come to some discretion, but I don't know if Daniel has an exact answer on that one.
Is this situation different than the owner sending an email to you saying, hey, I'm intending to turn this piece of property into a STR? Does that vest them if they sent that email?
If they sent that email, I would take it as vesting up to a point. Again, if they didn't do anything,
right,
and it was just vacant land sitting, I'll probably have to go with our what other rules and regs we have in effect. Site plans are effective for 1 year. If you're not acting, if you're not making that business decision at that time, then that's on you to maintain that vesting. Okay. I can't guarantee vesting for everybody. The state can guarantee vesting. I can guarantee to work with folks and keep as many people from falling through the cracks, but I cannot guarantee an unlimited what if for 20 years or 10. Okay. So, am I close, Daniel?
There's some provisions in Chapter 245 that the section's called dormant projects, and it provides some framework for the developer having to make a good faith effort to continue the project and not let it become dormant. Okay. And if they do, then there could be a potential to lose your vested rights during that project.
Okay, so our ordinance would be based upon that Chapter 245. Okay.
Well, we don't have an ordinance right now to address this because it's all set out by state law.
Okay.
And so I mean that's sort of the. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We would reference Chapter 245.
Right. Okay. I mean, so that's why we don't have like this specific issue addressed in the proposed ordinance draft, is because it's in state law. It already exists, and it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty specific and thorough.
Would it be to our best interest as a city to reference that state law in our section on vesting? Please see section 245.
I don't see any issue with that. I mean,
okay, because I think a lot of people might be thinking of, oh, I want to do this, and I bought the property, and so I can do it, not understanding the vesting rules.
Right.
So
that's fine.
Okay.
We can do that.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I buy a house, it's under contract, and my true intent is to make it short-term rental. How does that work? Do I email you and go, hey, after this house closes, I want to turn it to a short-term rental?
I would say, so when are you putting the offer?
Well, it's under contract.
It's under contract, but you haven't closed, or you haven't closed. Very similar to what Tom was asking. I would take the email. I would give you the benefit of the doubt, but I would ask you for some additional references or documentation.
And I guess what would come with that is there needs to be a timeline associated with that. You know, I close, and then I let it sit there for a year, even though I've given you this email. That was my intent.
Right.
You know, here's my contractor. You know, I've gone and talked to one of the booking reservation companies. You know, document that and so forth and so on.
Yeah, as long as they're moving forward within a period of time, I will take that in. I'm a pretty fair individual. I think most people who worked with me know that. But again, anything past a year would, and I haven't reviewed 245 in a while. You know, whatever that criteria is, we're going to follow that as much as we can.
Okay, because there's got to be some kind of time.
Is there a specific policy or time frame you guys want me to consider?
No.
I mean, if we need to.
If it's in the state law.
Got to be reasonable.
So Jason, I think.
Yeah, I would classify this as similar to any property over time. There's cases from San Antonio. Landowner has owned that property for 50 years. It has been zoned industrial. He just sat on it with one day plans to do this, and he'd spend a little money and he'd clean it up and he'd get engineering, and then it lay dormant, and then the city said, residential grew up around you, we're not doing industrial. They rezoned him. He sued and he lost because they'd said, you had time to act and you didn't. So, you know, every situation is going to be different, and I can tell you there are a lot of these out there. Our department has probably, if you go through our HRB review board, I mean, we've had 5 or 6 STR facilities at almost every meeting for the last 6 months. So some of those folks are just now finalizing who their architects are. They're going to be through 18 months of design and construction before they get that permit. So we're tracking some of those that we have in our files, but there's going to be like I said, my biggest concern is the one that we don't know about. I will have to use some judgment and rely on them to be honest with me on what they're doing, and we'll do the best we can. But yeah, you may see me in the court of ZBA once or twice in the next year. So.
Okay.
So if I stated it in my contract to buy the house, my intent was to.
Oh, I mean, that's a great way to vest. Now, again, if you want to live there for 2 years before you do it, no, at that point, you're choosing to lose your grandfathering, because you know the ordinance, and at that point, I'm not going to say this ordinance change is going to fix everything. It's not a silver bullet, and there are going to be some people that are going to have to make business decisions. Do I stay or do I go? Do I live or do I show? I mean, that's just the way it's going to go. So. Okay.
So Jason,
it probably would be in your real estate contract though, because you would have it in the paragraph with exclusions that you were permitted to do an STR there. So it probably would, your realtor would probably put that in your contract.
Okay.
Yeah, we've seen some contracts contingent on the current owner getting a short-term rental permit. So there's some evidence out there, and like I said, we'll be trying to be as fair as we can. But I'm not going to sit here and say that if you send me an email tomorrow that I'm on a vacant land, I'm going to let you do an STR in 10 years. That's just, I can't promise that.
Yeah.
So Jason, the other night at P&Z, I thought we asked the question that if we had a house under contract today, but it didn't close till after the ordinance took effect, that we were out of luck, that if it was an unoccupied house in R1, that we were out of luck. So are you saying 2 houses next to each other, if one of them contacted you and said, or had proof to say, I'm going to make this a short-term rental, then, and it closed after the ordinance took effect, they're okay, but if the one next to it was planning on doing the same thing but didn't notify you, they're out of luck?
If they don't have any evidence, then unfortunately, yes, they're out of luck. Because I'm not going to have a way to discern between that person that just didn't do anything and has no evidence to the person that was ready to live there and then realized, oh, this investor is going to give me, $100,000 more than asking. I'm just going to get my permit and flip it. I mean, I hadn't talked to him. I won't have any way to discern between those two. So I'm always going to err on the side of the most restrictive. And that is what we do as planners. The most restrictive wins out. And that is single-family residential, wins out. So.
Okay.
I will touch base on deed restrictions next, because I know that was a big topic this morning.
Let's go back one step. Thank you. Great minds think alike. That's right. Grandfathering non-conforming. I know there's some concern, I think it was already mentioned, that if you sell the property, it wouldn't transfer to the new owner.
So in my draft, I don't have a provision that prohibits sale of a short-term rental. In my line of work, for all the years that I've done this, every city I've been at has allowed those uses to continue as long as they do not cease operation. I've only been in one situation where we tried to prove that it was non-conforming and that the use ended, but that was a special. It was actually an old military depot, and they wanted to do something else and store explosives, and they tried to say it was a grandfathered use, and we said no, we're not doing that one. But for anything else, if council or P&Z makes a recommendation and wants to direct me to look at either a sunset provision or an end of at the sale, then please let me know and I'll look at that. But staff did not do that because there's a lot of variables and unknowns with that, and the courts are kind of all over the place with it. So I did not provide any sunset provisions in this. The uses will continue as long as that owner chooses to continue the use.
Okay, the question I have, someone buys a short-term rental, it closes. I want to reflect back to ag valuation. Does that permit then continue from the seller with that permit, or does that new buyer have to come in and get another permit? Kind of an extension sort of situation.
The buyer does have to get a new permit because we have to update our information. Again, we're tied into PD now with the BECA system. We have 10 days they have to, so we need that new permit to get contact for code enforcement and all that. But the use itself will continue, but it will be a new permit.
Okay, is there a timeline on that? It seems like that was discussed by the time they close to get to you to get a new permit.
10 days. And most of the time they will do that because they have to turn the water on anyways to get it switched over, and they do that immediately. So as long as they come up, when they go downstairs utility billing and get their water, their next stop is upstairs to us or fill it out on Granicus.
Okay.
But no, we did not, there's no sunset provisions in here. I did have a question, I don't know if he's still here, but it was regarding the grandfathering and how that works. So I want to be very clear on the 90 days. It is a voluntary ending of the use. Say the question was posed, say we revoke your permit and say that the language is 90 days, say that stayed as in the draft. Technically, he said, well, once I get it back, I lose it because I now haven't used it for 90 days. Again, it's a voluntary, so under that situation, they were forced to stop, so it's not voluntary. They wouldn't lose it when it started up. A second example would be your father has an STR permit, and he gives it to the son, and the daughter is mad, and she files an injunction, and they're in court for 2 years, and then they're done, and he wants to start up again. That was not a voluntary end of the property. We did also include a couple of, you can shut it down voluntary for repairs and additions and all of that, and you can also not lose it if you decide to live there, winter Texan. But if you live there more than a year, then yes. So I know some short-term rentals, they rent to folks on kind of a 30-day because it's someone working remotely, and they maybe not want to pay hot tax, and so they're going to rent for 30 days at a time. I wouldn't rent it for 90. I mean, just make sure, because again, that's their business decision on how they manage and manage that permit.
Thank you.
Any other questions on grandfathering before I get into deed restrictions? All right.
Any questions? Nope, seems like none.
So on deed restrictions, this has come up quite a bit recently. We'll use Stone Ridge as an example. They have deed restrictions that prohibit short-term rentals. That's quasi-true. They have deed restrictions that prohibit rentals for less than 365 days. So if someone were to come into that subdivision and and we don't pass this ordinance, and someone came in that subdivision and said, well, I bought a house, it's an LLC, I've sold 52 stocks, there are 52 stockholders that are going to use it every weekend for the next year. There's no transaction, there's no rental. That will be a party house in the middle of Stone Ridge, and it will function as a short-term rental. It won't be called that, and I won't issue a permit for it, but it will be there. So some of these regs we do need to adopt, at least the definitions portion, so that we can prohibit that type in those areas. Other deed restrictions, it's not so cut and dry. If your deed restrictions are very kind of 1980s vanilla, it either allows residential or it prohibits commercial, you won't stop one from coming in, because the state has said whether 1 day or 365, it's a residential use. So if your deed restrictions say no commercial, they will be in there. We can put some language, Daniel gave me some as a draft, a disclaimer that basically says this permit does not waive you of any obligations of covenants, restrictions, or deeds, but I don't enforce those. I can ask for a copy. I like Mo's idea where they have to provide a letter from the HOA, but there may be some deed restrictions and covenants where there is no HOA and the deeds are just there. So there's no letter to provide. If it meets zoning, I'm going to issue that permit. And so I don't know a good way to handle that through the deeds. Another concern I have is they change, so they can change. And so if someone brings me a copy of the deeds and it says something weird, I have to interpret something that's not my code, not my legal document. And is that even the latest version? So I'm okay with adding the language on the deeds in there, have no issue with that, but I just want people to know that have subdivisions, it is not the protection you think it is, and possibly take the time to look at those deeds.
Okay, now I'll keep in Stone Ridge with the cup. They would still, if it's an R1, and I came in there, I lived in Stone Ridge, and I want to turn mine into a short-term rental, wouldn't it have to go through the cup process?
Well, our cut process from the direction I got is not for every R1 property. It's only for those that are surrounded by R1s. Since there's none in Stone Ridge, no one is eligible for cup in Stone Ridge. We'll have to use another example.
Yeah, please do. Let's go to Carriage Hills.
So Carriage Hills, if we prohibit them in R1, I don't know what their deed restrictions say, but say they enact something that prohibits them. If they come in and it's a cut process on that one, then that would give a chance for the neighbors to be involved. I don't know that either way. I think that's a protection on the cut, but to me, the covenants and deeds is more that silent. We don't know it's out there. Especially if it's a by right area. So you could have an R2 zone and we're going to do it unoccupied by right, but they have a deed restriction. I think that's probably the more applicable look. Again, I don't feel comfortable interpreting a legal document that I don't have authority to. I have authority to interpret the zoning code. I don't have it to interpret deed restrictions. So that's another reason why I think it's very important we address short-term rentals through zoning, and I've always said that, because I don't think HOAs can dissolve, HOAs can change. I mean, there's so many variables with that, and again, it's not us. So if there's something specific you want me to look at, I know Daniel and I have had some discussions. We could ask for, if there's an active HOA, provide written letter. I think that helps, but there'll be times where they won't. I just want folks to know that it'll be more of a disclaimer, and they'll have to fight that legal battle on their own if I do issue a permit. And my experience with most HOAs is they have about a year's worth of landscaping and mowing budget and maybe 5 years worth of some road maintenance, but I don't think they have enough to take on a lawsuit by Verbo or some other major company. So.
I have one final question. It's not on this. It's on signs. Yeah, signs. Everywhere a sign. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I know that in the ordinance it specifies that STRs can have a sign. And must this sign be attached to the building? Are we going to allow freestanding signs in yards? If the identification signs, are the signs allowed on STRs in R1 and R2? I would like to see us come up with some kind of a common regulation that's uniform among zoning districts for short-term rentals.
So signs, I don't think I put it in the requirement, but this did come up in one of my conversations for notes, so we are allowing a sign up to 2 square feet. We will say it must be attached to the house. We
Do we
don't.
have, what's the current, do we have a current ordinance? Do we allow signs out in front of,
Not in residential.
okay, so my.
But we don't allow business signs. So a freestanding sign, pole sign up in the front yard that says
And Jemima's
House
B&B,
Bronze or whatever, that would not be allowed because the sign code doesn't allow it. But if you look at a residential neighborhood and you drive up and down, you see nameplates. You see the
Right.
Lutzes live here,
Right.
Tom
Right,
lives
but-
here. So we want to allow that.
But if there's a sign that says Aunt Violet's B&B, and it's in a residential area, and it's hanging on a pole in the front yard, that's not allowed right now?
That would not be allowed.
Okay, so the one that I reported 3 weeks ago that's still up is not supposed to be there?
I'll have to get with Ray and Ted and
Okay.
see where they're at on that one.
Okay, but what I would, I mean, if we're going to allow a nameplate, I would like to see it be uniform in all, all zoning districts. I mean, let's make sure that,
Well,
if we're either gonna allow them or we're not
Right,
gonna allow
nothing.
them, and if we are gonna allow
At the
them, I
end.
think they need to be uniform.
When
So-
you say uniform, they
Yeah,
look
we're talking
exactly the
color,
same?
graphics.
That means that they have to be attached, that they have to be attached to the house.
Okay.
So we will make them uniform for that way. The only other area where I would say, the reason, so the code says it actually shall adhere to the sign code, and then we have the carve out to allow for the nameplate. The reason that I reference the sign code is because we do have areas that like R2 where you can do a multifamily. So there are some allotments for signs on that. An STR facility, again, they're going to be designed as multifamily. But that's a sign code rewrite, and we are due for one. That's probably third or fourth on my priority list after the comp plan because our sign code is outdated and in some areas we have some legal issues we need to look at. But for STRs, we just felt on the unoccupied that looks residential. We didn't want pole signs. We didn't want that commercial feel. But houses get to have their signs with the Lutzes. We wanted to let them have their house sign or.
Could it be a part of the cup?
Anytime you do a cup, you can talk signage, and so that's
Maybe
something
that's the
there.
place to have it. Thank you.
I have a question. Can we go back to another subject, or are we finished with where you are?
Well, it depends. I mean, are you talking going back to R1 or just?
Yeah, I want to clarify something in R1.
If it's a clarification, real quick, if it's a question, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some confusion in the audience and now with me of what we actually recommended in R1, and that is owner occupied only can have a B&B and an STR accessory. Owner occupied only. That no new STRs in R1 except if there's a block has almost full of STRs, then it would be a cup process to look at
Yes.
the next one.
So in R1, STR, B&B, STR accessory, thank you, by right.
Owner occupied.
Owner occupied. The unoccupied would not be allowed anywhere in R1, except for the areas where you have 2 or more property lines that are adjacent to short-term rentals. So you're surrounded, you're the donut, you're the holdout, whatever they want to call it. And if you are 50% more of your block has short-term rentals on it. And that would be it.
CUP process.
And then it would be a CUP process.
Yep. And that was it, yeah. Because I had asked if we wanted to do CUP next to commercial, and we said no.
No.
Just the fill-ins. Yep.
Okay. Are we ever going to make any, I think, maybe Polly suggested that maybe we have too many fill-in spots around town, or?
No, that was on the commercial.
Okay.
I thought we had a lot of commercial adjacencies,
Yeah.
but we got rid of that.
Okay.
Yep. So no, there's only about 130 in town. But So I do want to clarify, you're not a donut if you're surrounded by the STR B&B or STR accessory structure. As those pop up on the map, you don't get to apply for the unoccupied as a CUP, because those are by rights living there. So your donut hole will be only if it's all unoccupied, then you can apply for the CUP. So it was in our draft written like that, and that was to prevent that creep where we started adding more CUPs and then we added more, so.
Thank you.
So, if we don't have any other concerns on the other short-term rental issues that we didn't put on the agenda, I'm gonna just recap real quick. I didn't hear a lot of concerns other than referencing Chapter 245 vesting in the non-conforming uses section. And then just making sure that our signs allowances for the short-term rentals are attached to the wall and look, and we did 2 square feet. That's a 1 foot by 2 foot. That's a fairly big sign. So am I missing anything?
I have a question on effective date for council. If y'all are wanting to pass this ordinance all effective immediately whenever you vote on it, or something like the enforcement is effective immediately, but you give a grace period, a week or something for real estate transactions that are in process? Or is it all on March 21st or whatever day y'all vote?
I think what I had heard prior was that there'd be some type of delay. You know, say, I'm just paraphrasing, say it was approved March 7th on first reading, no second readings, then maybe an April 1st implementation is what we discussed. Ultimately, I think it depends on how far down the road we get and what that timeline is, but that'll be council's kind of discussion or concern, unless y'all have some recommendations from P&Z side you want to let them know. But those type of recommendations I think we handle at our meeting because it's fairly innocuous, and then again it's up to council on there. But
excuse me. Yeah, I don't remember discussing that.
So I'm going to just then highlight our timeline. So I know it sounds like
Jason.
Yes, sir.
One other issue is the permit fees. I know there's some people in the audience that are curious about what we're going to propose on permit fees, so you might want to go through that if you thought that. And that will be adopted, I think, according to the same schedule. So, Jason, did you want to outline that? Because I'm sure people are interested in what we're recommending.
So on the fees, caught me a little off guard on that, Ken. I don't have my fees with me. We did a couple of different scenarios.
Is that it, Jason?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
So I think if I recall correctly, I used some numbers I got from the Short-Term Rental Alliance. We looked at a tiered system for fees. You know, so a 1-bedroom would be 1 fee and then a fee for each additional bedroom. So based on the numbers from Air DNA, we kind of did some estimates on what the percentages are in the city. So we're looking at, I think it was maybe the third option.
You were looking at 150 for the 1-bedroom, but Jerry, Councilman Lukenbach brought to my attention today, one of your numbers are off for the salary for Kyle. So once you plug his salary number in, I think you're looking at $200 for a 1-bedroom, and then paired up from that $200,
Okay.
250, 300.
Yeah, so that's how we kind of settled on the tiered system. So I think I started at 150. There's some options here. Let me redo the numbers, but it was basically a starting point of 150 or 250 with $100 for each additional bedroom, because obviously it takes us longer to inspect a 5-bedroom house than it does the 1-1. And so that was something the Alliance pointed out to us early, and we felt that was fair. It's just on my priorities of things I was going to tackle, it was going to be last, because this will be implemented into the fee schedule itself and won't be part of this ordinance.
I just wanted the council and Pike Zoning Commission to know that this is coming forward. the same time.
So in your scenario, it's a one-bedroom house, $200. If it's a five-bedroom house, it's $700.
Mhm.
Is an hour per bedroom to give Kyle to walk through and make sure it's okay?
Well, we're doing it based on just kind of the overall numbers. There's a lot more to than just Kyle going and inspecting it. I mean, we do plan review, we do permitting. So basically, we calculated our total expenses for the year regarding short-term rentals, and then broke that down by the number of STRs we think we have. Now, as they increase every year, if we start permitting more, we'll adjust those fees accordingly.
Okay.
But it's kind of based on our current projected numbers. Not really a by, like, oh, it's an hour to walk through the deal.
Now, are these fees annual fees, and the permit's good for 2 years?
These are annual fees, and the permit is good for a year.
For a year?
For a
Okay.
year. And
Okay.
so inspections were two years.
Inspections were 2 years.
Actually, in this draft, we took that back. We changed inspections to complaints. So like the neighbor that says, hey, they're supposed to be sleeping 10 and I saw 12 people there. We go back in and verify beds, because that's probably our biggest violation. And Charlie, you're right, you called it every time. So.
Never did it, I just heard about it.
You know, that's where we find the bedroom, the bed in the closet, and 4 in the attic and all of that.
Bathtub.
But we are talking about a significant number of short-term rentals in the community. I believe, you know, as units go, we were already approaching 1,000 units. That was in October. So again, and our ordinance doesn't outright prohibit short-term rentals in any zoning district. So we are going to see an increase in short-term rentals in our community. And so my limited staff and the time that we deal with it, we just felt that when we inspect these, 90% of the time, they don't change. People have their established business models. Our managers are great. They get a lot of returning customers. Even when they change hands, they may change paint color, but they don't change. So we just felt that it'd probably be a whole lot easier on the management side to just, as long as they're not getting complaints and they're not doing a addition or demo, we would just inspect them on their initial permit and as we have issues, versus every year waiting to schedule those inspections.
Thank you. Does this conclude your part, Jason?
Well, it depends on how many questions you'll have for me, so.
Okay, go ahead.
So yes, next steps, we are in line for a special P&Z meeting for recommendation to council on 3/7, and then maybe a second meeting on 3/22. I can tell you that meeting is next Wednesday. That gives me tomorrow to make all the changes from this draft. I could probably do all of it except the enforcement and penalties. I will really need some time to work with Daniel and staff and some of the folks. I don't think I can knock that out. I think there's enough direction, and we've done enough research on the actual regs that my staff can throw those together pretty quick. So if we need to modify this schedule, I think that's the direction I need to get from you guys. And just, it can't be modified by a week, because we do have some legal notice that we have to do, so.
Jason, in your opinion, should we bring the whole package at one time, or do this first and then bring the enforcement later? I don't mind extending. I want to get it right to start with.
And I'm thinking that one meeting on the 16th may be a little tight for P&Z also. Because, I mean, this has been pretty much controlled over following these slides and an agenda, but I know there's other people who have questions.
Charlie, Mayor, I like your idea of getting the change. From our standpoint, we would like to get this done as quickly as possible, just because we have more, every day we're getting more and more non-conforming STRs, because at some point we expect some version of an ordinance to be passed.
Okay.
And I think getting it passed helps the citizens as quickly as possible. We could do it in pieces. We could do kind of all the development regs and come back on the enforcement side and just leave our current language where I think Kent has the ability to revoke a permit, and we could leave it at that to give us some time to go through it. But the package really needs to be a whole deal. I wouldn't separate certain sections because they all work together. So I'm a little nervous about what happens if we adopt it all and don't have penalties and provisions really queued up.
Okay, I heard two answers there.
So,
I'm just trying to give you options, sir.
I heard two, at least I think I heard.
So,
One is
Jason?
pass it quickly and bring the court enforcement, or bring them all together at one time. Okay, I heard two
okay,
answers.
so what I'm hearing is that it's going to be one big thing, and you're going to be burning the midnight oil, and it goes to planning and zoning next Wednesday. And of course, if planning and zoning is uncomfortable, then they always have the option of taking no action. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know.
Is there a timeline involved?
Well,
Yeah,
one other issue, Mayor and Council, you need to consider is, last week, as you know, we sent out 5,300 letters to inform people that this is coming forward for planning and zoning and council consideration. And I would like to, if we could, try to avoid having to send out another group of letters, because it generates a lot of calls and inquiries and confusion among the citizens. So at what point, Daniel, can we get by in council's consideration of this without having to go through that process again?
Once planning and zoning holds their public hearing, then there is a timeline, that statutory timeline that's in place. And so, one option would maybe be to commence a public hearing and then recess it and recommence it at a later date. But I think you at least need to have your public, you've noticed a public hearing for the 16th, so if you don't have it, then you're probably going to have to
But you could start it on the 16th and continue it on whatever the March meeting.
Well,
What kind of limits do you have on the recess?
that's already kind of going off the book, so I don't know. I mean, there's that's kind of already being creative in a solution to the problem. I mean, the way that the ordinance is written is you have your public hearing, then you have 20 days from that for P&Z to make your recommendation. So, I mean, one option would be to have your public hearing. You could talk about it on the 16th and have additional meetings within 20 days following that to put your recommendation together to get it to council.
So,
the biggest fear is the fact that we end up with an hour and a half worth of public comments.
well, that'll probably happen.
And it just bogs us to the point where we can't.
So I do think most of what I'm hearing on these changes, development-wise, is very similar to what was in a prior draft. And I think most people will pick and pull from that, and they'll understand it. I've been burning the midnight oil for a long time now, so I have no issue doing that tonight and tomorrow. I would rather push forward, at least get something to P&Z. If there are tweaks with the language on the enforcement and penalty, that's P&Z's job to make those tweaks and recommended changes. So at that meeting, they could say, hey, we don't like your matrix, we don't like anything. We recommend approval with a recommendation to scrap this and take something new to council. That does give me more time to get to council and work on that to finalize it even a little tighter, or get something that works for everybody. But I'd like to keep, I'd rather not stuff 5,388 envelopes and kick this down 30, 45, 60 days.
Well, I wasn't recommending that.
So, I mean, like I said, if you guys want me to burn some midnight oil, we'll just keep doing what we've been doing and do it.
Well, you're awake at that time of night anyway.
Well,
sometimes, sir, sometimes.
My concern is, I don't want to see another meeting like we had last week where we hit P&Z, slapped them in the face with this ordinance, and they didn't know anything about it. Right. And I don't know that, okay, so you work all night tonight and tomorrow, and you get it, when do you get it to them? Monday? Is that enough time to truly review?
It'd be out Friday night.
is that truly enough time to review version 5? And
Is there a big issue between council looking at this in the 2 meetings in March versus the 2 meetings in April?
Depends on how many permits we're getting a day. I mean, that's ultimately
Okay.
Well,
advertising. I mean, we from a staff standpoint, we'll do whatever
No,
council
but
wants.
is it
but
an advertising issue?
there's
with the
advertising
letters?
issues.
Well,
We
there's
have
other-
comp plans sitting on my desk that need to get through. I mean, our priorities and our work are
Well,
kind of
there's-
hitting a wall because of this project. And so, go ahead.
So there's a lot of competing projects to this one, and just, I wanted the council to realize this so you'll understand the situation. Number one is we're converting to Granicus, and that conversion has to take place between now and April 1st, and that's not a real simple process. It'll involve a lot of staff time to get all of our records moved from Avenue Inside over to Granicus and be ready to operate on April 1st. We also are trying to kick off the comprehensive planning process. The consultant proposals are in. They've been sitting in Jason's office since last week. I've been after him, let's get this thing going, but he's working as many hours as he can. And then we have a lot of development projects coming in, and unfortunately, because of the new legislation on shot clock, we can't push those projects back. We have to act on them with a certain period of time. So we've got a lot of competing forces here, and I'd suggest we get this done as soon as we can so we can move on to these other things because we just,
well, I understand, Kent, and I truly understand that we've got a lot of projects. This one particular item is huge for our community, and if we don't do it right the first time, sure, there'll be changes and things we need to do, but if we don't take the time, we're just talking another week or whatever. I don't know what all the timing is, but if we push P&Z, they don't have enough time to truly review it and come out with a good answer and then advise city council properly. I'm concerned with we're not going to have a very good outcome. And so that's my only concern. This is too important for our community to rush it because we're really busy.
I would like to hold my P&Z. How do y'all feel about it next week after having this meeting today? Do you think next Wednesday?
I think I need some soak time once I see it. I need to see it in its entirety, and I need some time to soak. And I've got a business to run too, so I've got to do this on the
I think what Bobby said is exactly right. We got to get this right. This is too important. It's too big, whether it's a day, 2 days, a week. In the grand scheme of things, what does it matter? But let's get it right. Let's don't rush it. I mean, I don't think the 16th seems too quick. You know, is it a couple more days? Is it a week?
So
I don't know how fast.
do you have to cancel that meeting?
You could always have a special meeting, couldn't you?
So, I mean, we'd need to have the meeting because of all those notices that were sent out.
2 weeks. Yeah. Next Wednesday and the following Wednesday.
I mean, because you can't cancel that meeting, right? Then you'd have to send notices out to all those people.
Can you still have a public hearing?
That's what I'm asking. Do we still have a meeting and?
Right. So you can hold the public hearing on the 16th and that's it, and then not do anything. You have 20 days after that to give a recommendation. So you could have your public hearing, and then if you want to talk about it on the 16th, and then have another meeting, or whatever you can fit into that time period.
That's fine. That works.
So, Daniel, if I can ask, and maybe this is I know Jim had a concern about this as well. We hold our public hearing on the 16th. We allow all the public comment at that point, and we recess it on that next meeting. Can we just get into the details, or do we have to have
At the
another?
next meeting without.
Right. No, you only have to have one. You only have to have one public hearing.
How about
Okay, public comment
You do have to allow public comments on the item on the agenda, which would
at every
which would be this, right?
Well, that's, I mean, then you've got 39 people standing up again, we got 2 hours, I mean.
Well, all right, so what? We've been here all day. What difference does it make? Well, really?
That's the ticket right there. And I'm the shot clock runner at P&Z, so I can fix that. He said we can limit public comment to 1 minute. You know, I'm just going to be quite honest. I'm just going to be quite honest. I mean, I didn't go to that STR deal yesterday because I heard everybody's thoughts.
And I don't need any more.
I don't think they're changing your mind, and some of us
Exactly.
aren't.
So, but I understand we have to have, but it's impeding us making a sound decision. Just what I'm saying.
So
Have a meeting.
have
listen to
the
public
16th
comments.
and then plan that next one as well. Do our public hearing on the 16th and then do our recommendation on
But
the
can
following.
we do it in
The following
time?
Wednesday.
Can we do
The
it in
following
time for them to have their meeting on the 7th?
Yeah, we'll come back on the following Wednesday.
That timeline work for you guys? I think it's appropriate.
I just need to get with Daniel and make sure legal notice and everything, and we'll adjust the timeline. But if that's the way I want to go, then that's the way we'll go. So I'll work with Kent and Daniel and P&Z, and we'll move forward to the meeting next Monday. I think we'll just leave the current draft 4 out, and we'll just meet and let citizens have the public hearing, can kind of discuss, and then recess it.
So you won't have the revisions by Friday, is that what you're saying?
If you want them by Friday, I'll get them.
Oh, wait, you
I just
said-
want to
I
know,
think we
I
can
just
do
need
the
to know.
revisions.
Yeah, to
I
talk
would-
about
I
the
would give
You
revision.
just said draft 4. Wouldn't this be draft 5
What
for
the,
P&Z?
no, I mean, I didn't know if y'all wanted, if you wanted the revisions on Friday, and then we'll get them out for that meeting, or however. So, yeah, we'll work on that.
If it's
All right.
possible.
I
Well,
would say,
I
based
think,
upon the week you've
and I'm
had,
putting
I
words
would,
in your mouth, but if you do revision 5, you hold your public meeting, there might be a revision 6.
Well, it would be a recommendation from the P&Z.
I don't know that we're going to make any recommendations that night. Everybody's leaving. It
No, I
sounds
know,
like they
but-
don't want to have any.
That's before we.
There could very well be a version
Correct.
6.
Well, I think we've got enough direction. Let me get with Kent, Daniel, and Charlie, and we'll get out some timelines, some option timelines in case we can't make them work. And then, we'll also have the internal discussion on whether we need to have some of these meetings, whether we can, if we have to adjust the council meeting or something, do we have it here? Do we have it LEC? So I think we can huddle up as a staff and make some timelines work for
And I
y'all.
would say, based upon the week you have, giving us a summary of what happened today would be okay by tomorrow, but I don't expect this whole thing to be revised by tomorrow.
We have all day to work.
Yeah, I was thinking of it all night.
What's the point of meeting, though, if it's the same thing, that everyone's going to be commenting on the same draft again,
Because you publicize it.
If we don't have any
It
new.
doesn't matter. They're going to say the same thing no matter what draft we have.
So how much time do you need to soak in the new language before we,
Well,
like, is,
the entire enforcement section isn't written, so, I mean, there's whole chunks that they've got to work through. I mean, if we're going to vote on the thing in its totality, that's got to be in.
Sure.
You're talking about having a draft for the public to look at before the comments on Wednesday night.
Well, if we're holding the meeting on Wednesday, my goal is agendas going out either Friday night or Saturday morning, because they have to be out by the end of the day, Saturday. I mean, agenda has to be posted and comments have to go out. So that would give us tonight and tomorrow to get her done. And hopefully, Tammy, are you available tomorrow? Because I'm going to need your assistance if you're available.
Which Tammy?
Any and all.
All Tammy's in the room.
But Jason, what Janet's recommended, I think it's good. Let's don't go with draft 5 yet. Let's just compile the recommendations that were suggested today and focus on those recommendations. And then when everybody agrees on the recommendations, including the city council, then we prepare draft 5, which is the final one that will be voted on.
Okay.
That makes good sense.
I think I'm done, sir. You asked me when I was done. I think I'm done.
Start working.
Thank you, Jason. Okay. Clinton?
I'm done.
Okay. There are no council comments, correct, on the agenda? However, as mayor, I want to thank P&Z folks, city council, staff.
Good job.
The public, thank you. I appreciate all the input and everything we've heard this evening. I think we're on the right direction personally, to protect neighborhoods, but also to give the short-term rental industry an opportunity to continue in, I think Jason said, a soft cup kind of procedure. So again, thank you all very much. You all have a good evening. Be blessed. So at this point in time, I will ask for a motion to close this meeting from council.
Second.
Motion by Tom, second
I
by
move that
Bobby.
we adjourn.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? There's none. Even, did y'all vote for us to close too? Okay.
Didn't think we'd ever get to it.